Chapter 1101. Although the Thunder Dragon Kang Na was captured by the Moonlight Net, she was not willing to accept defeat and was still struggling in the net. The pale yellow moonlight on the surface of the Moonlight Net constantly changed into small light swords. These light swords constantly pierced into Kang Na's body, creating small wounds on the surface of Kang Na's body. Although these wounds were very small, there were too many of them, so the surface of Kang Na's body was soon covered with her own pure white blood. The whole dragon looked as if she had been sprayed with an unknown white liquid. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 3 minutes. Time passed by. This Moonlight Net did not last for only a few seconds as the other sword-bearers had imagined, but it continued continuously. The damage Kang Na received was also increasing. The pure white dragon blood that flowed out of her body had converged from a small pond into a large lake, submerging several ordinary residential areas. Such a large amount of blood loss was almost half of the Thunder Dragon's HP. Although they didn't know what such a loss meant for a dragon, for a human, losing half of her HP was definitely a fatal loss. Hooray! Hooray! This was the first time that Kang Na had suffered such a serious injury, and it was an absolutely fatal injury, so the sword-bearers cheered even more excitedly. This time, they really saw victory. The spirit sword level sword-bearers who were still in a meeting just now also cheered, but the flesh on their faces was very stiff, and it could be seen that these smiles were forced. They had no idea that Sword Immortal Ling Shu was so powerful that he could completely control the flood-level Yuan Ku by himself. In this way, all the wrangling just now had fallen into the eyes of Sword Immortal Ling Shu. They believed that after this battle was over, Sword Immortal Ling Shu would definitely not let them go. The only spirit sword level sword-bearer who showed a sincere smile was the Tiger Raw Sword Spirit. He felt that his efforts were not in vain, so he showed a sincere smile. But Guhan on the city wall could not smile. Whether it was a fake smile or a sincere smile, he could not smile. Others might not be able to see through this trick, but Guhan could see it clearly. Guhan was well aware of the Wangshu sword's ability. Against a flood-class Yuan Ku like Kang Na, the Moonlight Net could only restrain her for 5 seconds at most. However, the Moonlight Net had already lasted for 8 minutes. Unless this Thunder and Lightning Dragon was a fake flood-level Yuan Ku, it was impossible for the Moonlight Net to last so long. Guhan couldn't help but cast his gaze toward Sword Immortal Ling Shu, who was still hovering in mid-air in the form of an infant with blue fireflies erupting from his body. It looked like the reason for the Moonlight Net's abnormality lay with Sword Immortal Ling Shu. Guhan was certain that to use the Moonlight Net, he only needed to condense moonlight. He didn't need the Wangshu sword wielder to emit any blue fireflies from his body. The blue firefly clearly had the effect of strengthening the Moonlight Net, which was why it could last for 8 minutes. But what exactly was this blue firefly? Why could it strengthen the Moonlight Net? Just as Guhan was wondering about this, Sword Immortal Ling Shu's body suddenly began to tremble violently. The number of blue fireflies that had been continuously supplied also began to decrease drastically. In the blink of an eye, it had almost disappeared without a trace. Not good. Looks like Sword Immortal Ling Shu's blessing is almost exhausted. Guhan's guess was immediately verified. After the blue fireflies disappeared, the Moonlight Net that trapped the Thunder Dragon Kang Na also quickly dimmed. The faint yellow swords that were constantly condensing to attack Kang Na disappeared first. Then, the Moonlight Net also began to slowly fade. In at most 3 seconds, this Moonlight Net would completely lose its effect. Wangshu. Moonlight Impact. Sword Immortal Ling Shu, who was floating in the air, let out a final roar with a ferocious expression. The Moonlight Net that had been about to disappear suddenly condensed back to its strongest state, and the moon hanging high up in the sky also poured its moonlight to the extreme in this instant. The Moonlight Net erupted with the most dazzling moonlight Guhan had ever seen in his life. The entire Moonlight Net tightened in an instant, and then all of it was squeezed into the body of the Thunder Dragon Kang Na. Kang Na was clearly in great pain. Her beautiful dragon eyes widened to the extreme, and her dragon mouth opened as if she wanted to cry out in pain. But in the end, Kang Na could only say, "Oh no." Then, her body exploded like a pissing meatball. Pure white dragon blood once again burst out. In the end, Kang Na could no longer maintain her flight. She fell heavily into the blood lake formed by her dripping blood, and no longer made a sound. We won. We really won. Seeing this scene, all the sword bearers looked at each other in disbelief. They didn't think that sword immortal Ling Shu could really rely on the power of an immortal sword tier sword bearer to kill a flood level Yuan Ku. This was even more unbelievable than a sow climbing a tree, or the moon in the water. Since ancient times, other than Kanzu and Zhetian Jendi, there had never been an immortal sword tier sword bearer who defeated a flood level Yuan Ku. Could it be that sword immortal Ling Shu was a powerful sword bearer comparable to Kanzu and Zhetian Jendi? But there was no point in caring about this. A large number of sword bearers flew to sword immortal Ling Shu's side, preparing to celebrate sword immortal Ling Shu's victory. Sword immortal Ling Shu, who was floating in the air, suddenly fell from the sky. If it wasn't for a beautiful woman beside him who reacted quickly and caught sword immortal Ling Shu's body, sword immortal Ling Shu would have fallen off the city wall. What happened to sword immortal Ling Shu? Seeing the hero of Yuzhang City suddenly fall, the surrounding sword bearers immediately asked nervously. His situation is very bad. I'm afraid he has expended a large amount of his life force, at least 10 years of life. The beautiful woman who was holding sword immortal Ling Shu replied. Who are you? What right do you have to say that? Hearing the beautiful woman's words, one of the surrounding sword bearers immediately said in dissatisfaction. Wasn't she cursing sword immortal Ling Shu? Whatever I say is true. Whether you believe it or not is up to you, and I don't care. The beautiful woman raised her head and said indifferently. Then, the sword bearer who had just raised a question was instantly speechless. This woman was really too beautiful, so beautiful that he forgot how to breathe. But the truth didn't need this beautiful woman to say any more. After the beautiful woman's words fell, sword immortal Ling Shu's originally jet black hair instantly turned silvery white. His originally full and elastic skin was now filled with all kinds of wrinkles and age spots. Without a doubt, sword immortal Ling Shu had expended a large amount of his life force. He had already directly entered the state of old age from his original middle-aged self. Miss Shen Yuan. Sword immortal Ling Shu slowly opened his eyes, which were filled with exhaustion. When he saw Jiyu Shen Yuan appear beside him, a gratified expression appeared on his face. He asked weakly, Miss Shen Yuan, have we won? Master Ling Shu. We've won. That huge dragon has already been defeated by you. Without waiting for Jiyu Shen Yuan to reply, the surrounding sword bearers immediately took the initiative to answer on her behalf. Miss Shen Yuan. However, sword immortal Ling Shu didn't care about the strength of these sword bearers. Instead, his gaze was fixed on Jiyu Shen Yuan, waiting for her to give him an answer. I'm afraid it won't be so smooth. Jiyu Shen Yuan said indifferently. That Yuan Ku isn't dead yet. Woman, you're so beautiful. What nonsense are you spouting? That huge dragon was clearly defeated by the Wangshu sword goddess. Everyone saw this with their own eyes. What right do you have to say that she's not dead yet? The surrounding sword bearers immediately retorted agitatedly. It looked like these sword bearers were completely unwilling to accept the fact that the huge dragon wasn't dead yet. Then what proof do you have to say that she's dead? Jiyu Shen Yuan humphed coldly. Don't let your emotions get to your heads. You didn't even see the most obvious thing. Where is the dimensional vortex? If that huge dragon is really dead, where did the dimensional vortex go? Could it be that the dimensional vortex won't appear anymore? Everyone was instantly rendered speechless by Jiyu Shen Yuan's words. At the same time, the joy in their hearts instantly disappeared without a trace. Could it be that it was really as this beauty had said? That the lightning dragon wasn't dead yet? Wangshu sword. Sword immortal Ling Shu's expression also changed. With great difficulty, he called out the name of the Wangshu sword. At the same time, the moonlight net in the sky appeared once again. It gathered toward the center once more, and finally transformed back into the appearance of the Wangshu sword goddess. Just like the extremely exhausted and weak sword immortal Ling Shu, the Wangshu sword goddess who had reappeared was also extremely weak. The protective shield around her was like a white light bulb whose filament was about to explode. In the end, It flickered a few times before completely disappearing. In such a state, the Wangshu sword goddess was definitely unable to continue fighting. However, she still stared warily at the lake of blood that Kang Na had fallen into. It was as if Kang Na could appear at any moment, and she was also prepared to continue fighting at any moment. However, the Wangshu sword goddess stood guard by the side of the lake of blood for a full 10 minutes. There was still no movement from the lake of blood. All of the spectating sword-wielding cultivators began to discuss spiritedly among themselves. Some of them even privately accused Jiyu Shenyuan of exaggerating the truth and worrying about unnecessary things. She was making it so that sword immortal Ling Shu and the Wangshu sword were unable to rest and had to fight with their injuries. However, Jiyu Shenyuan wasn't moved by these discussions. Instead, just like the Wangshu sword goddess, she stared intently at the lake of blood. Suddenly, amidst the commotion, a small figure tore through the void and appeared behind the Wangshu sword. This figure was far too small, and the Wangshu sword was far too exhausted. In addition, all of her attention was focused on the lake of blood. As a result, she didn't even notice that a white figure had appeared behind her. Oh no! This white figure raised her little fist and hammered it towards the back of the Wangshu sword's heart. Chapter 1102. The raised fist was very small, about the size of an ordinary primary school student's fist. However, the power contained in the fist was extremely terrifying. At that moment, the Wangshu sword lady's personal shield had already disappeared. If such a fist were to strike the middle of her back, her durability would probably be greatly damaged. It was even possible for it to break. After all, this was a full-powered attack from a flood-level Yuan Ku filled with rage. When the small figure raised her fist, the Wangshu sword lady finally sensed that something was wrong behind her. She turned around in a panic, preparing to flee. However, it was already too late. She was so weak that she couldn't burst forth with her previous speed. She didn't even have the strength to re-enter the void to evade. All she could do was watch as the fist came smashing toward her. At that critical moment, a stream of sword light appeared between the Wangshu sword lady and the small figure. It was only then that the people on the city walls saw what had just happened. An ordinary-looking long sword had coincidentally struck the small fist. If the long sword had been one step slower, the Wangshu sword lady would probably have met with misfortune. "And who are you?" The one who spoke was dressed in a white and pink laced overgarment and miniskirt. She had a pair of thick legs that were thin at the bottom and thick at the top. She wore a pair of white cotton socks that went over her knees. She had a large square face, short silver-white hair tinged with pink, and bangs that looked like they were made of air. If it wasn't for the two silver-white dragon horns on her head and the tail that had a furry cotton ball attached to it, Guhan would definitely think that she was an ordinary and cute human lowly. He wouldn't have associated her with that terrifying lightning dragon. "She's too cute. My nose is about to bleed." When the sword-bearers on the city walls saw the cute little lowly, some of them who were experienced lolicans couldn't hold back their excitement. Their noses started to bleed. Some of them even took out their medical pods to prevent themselves from collapsing from excessive blood loss. Even Guhan, who was standing opposite Kang Na, had to admit that she was indeed a very cute little lowly. Her cuteness was second only to his mischievous Qingpin. Unfortunately, there were many people in Yuzhang City who knew Qingpin, so Guhan had to force all his sword maidens into the dimensional pocket to avoid giving himself away. "Hey!" Kang Na wasn't discouraged when she saw her fist blocked by Jiyu Shenyuan. Instead, she raised her other fist and continued hammering at the Wangshu sword lady behind Jiyu Shenyuan. Jiyu Shenyuan blocked with the Zhuxian sword once again knocking Kang Na's little fist back. She then turned to Lady Shujian and said, "Lady Shujian, you should go back. Not only will you not be able to help me, but you'll also be a hindrance. I'll have to divert my attention to protect you." "You!" The Wangshu sword lady was so infuriated by Jiyu Xuanyuan's words that her mouth became crooked. She was about to retort and insist on staying behind to continue battling this huge dragon. However, Sword Immortal Ling Shu said, "Lady Shujian, please come down. We've already contributed enough to Yuzhang City. The rest will depend on the efforts of the people of Yuzhang City." Hearing Sword Immortal Ling Shu say this, the Wangshu Sword Lady harumphed indignantly. Then, she directly flew towards the core region. "You're not allowed to leave." Kang Na saw that the Wangshu Sword Lady was about to leave. How could she let her leave? Apart from being sealed by Liu Yunue's ancestor, Kang Na had never suffered such a great injustice in her life. Thus, she immediately dispersed the void around her, wanting to chase after the Wangshu Sword Lady through the void and stop her. "You're not allowed to leave." Jiyu Shenyuan also said that she wasn't allowed to leave. However, Jiyu Shenyuan didn't have the ability to traverse the void like Kang Na and the Wangshu Sword Lady. Thus, she flew to the Wangshu Sword Lady's side at an extremely fast speed and escorted her back to the core region. This was because Jiyu Shenyuan knew that if Kang Na wanted to attack the Wangshu Sword Lady, she could only do so on the way. Otherwise, once the Wangshu Sword Lady entered the dimensional barrier, Kang Na wouldn't be able to touch the Wangshu Sword Lady before she broke through the barrier. Sure enough, Jiyu Xuanyuan's guess was correct. When the Wangshu Sword Lady was about 100 meters away from the dimensional barrier, Kang Na finally couldn't wait any longer and charged out of the void. She wanted to send the Wangshu Sword Lady flying out. However, Jiyu Shenyuan was a step faster than Kang Na. She blocked Kang Na's attack in advance. The short-legged lowly could only watch helplessly as the Wangshu Sword Lady entered the dimensional barrier. "How annoying," Kang Na said with a dark expression when she saw the person who had bullied her escape back into her turtle shell. Her surroundings were filled with angry electric sparks. In an instant, all these electric sparks shot towards Jiyu Xuanyuan's body. Jiyu Shenyuan recognized these electric sparks. They were the same electric sparks that had paralyzed the Wangshu Sword Lady. Although Jiyu Shenyuan had the immortal slaying sword in hand, her body constitution and resistance were far inferior to the Wangshu Sword Lady. In fact, Jiyu Shenyuan didn't even have her own personal shield. If she were to be struck by the sparks, she would probably immediately fall into an endless state of paralysis. 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven, Sword of Spring. At this slightly urgent moment, Jiyu Shenyuan used the 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven that she hadn't used in a long time. Although Jiyu Xuanyuan's greatest killing move was the incomplete Chaos Sword technique, it was still the best choice to deal with these electric sparks. The 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven was the best choice to deal with these electric sparks. The immortal slaying sword formation emitted an umbrella-like sword chi, blocking all the electric sparks. Kang Na's first wave of attack against Jiyu Shenyuan was also fruitless. "This is bad." Although Kang Na liked to say the words "this is bad," every "this is bad" actually contained different emotions. For example, the "this is bad" she had just said contained extreme displeasure. Kang Na's furry tail rose up, and countless electric sparks shot out from her tail, condensing into small crabs in the air. However, these crabs were all formed from the surging electric sparks. Electric barbecue. With Kang Na's command, the countless electric crabs hovering around her carried the attitude of wanting to electric barbecue Jiyu Shenyuan. They charged towards Jiyu Shenyuan from all directions. These electric crabs were like guided missiles. If any of them exploded near Jiyu Shenyuan, given her current state of not having a personal barrier, she would be roasted alive by these electric crabs. 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven, Overlook Golden Chrysanthemum. The immortal slaying sword's blade swept horizontally, and a golden chrysanthemum formed by countless sword chi radiated with Jiyu Shenyuan as the center. The moment these golden chrysanthemums came into contact with the electric crabs, they were all chopped into small sparkling electric sparks. These electric sparks were attached to Jiyu Xuanyuan's sword chi, making the originally golden Overlook Golden Chrysanthemum even more dazzling. "Go!" Jiyu Shenyuan snapped her fingers, and the Overlook Golden Chrysanthemum that absorbed the electric crabs turned around and shrouded Kang Na, who was hovering opposite. "Oh, this is bad." Kang Na had never seen her electric crabs being absorbed by someone else's attack. For a moment, she was a little dumbfounded. She even forgot to enter the void to avoid the Overlook Golden Chrysanthemum. As a result, she was hit by the Overlook Golden Chrysanthemum. Crackle, crackle. The dazzling electric sparks that erupted from the Overlook Golden Chrysanthemum made it impossible for the other sword wielders to look directly at the battlefield. They could only use their hands to shield their eyes, lest the blinding electric sparks hurt their eyes. When the exploding electric sparks finally dissipated, everyone hurriedly opened their eyes. They discovered that Jiyu Shenyuan was completely unscathed in the air, and she still looked as content as ever. On the other side, Kang Na wasn't so well off. She no longer had the pure white and adorable lowly appearance from before. Instead, her body was riddled with tiny wounds from the sword chi, and pure white blood continued to flow from the wounds. Because of sword immortal Ling Shu's attack just now, Kang Na had already lost a lot of dragon blood. Who would have thought that Jiyu Xuanyuan's attack would cause her to lose even more dragon blood? What made Kang Na feel even more humiliated was that her body was full of black and white burn marks from being electrocuted. This was probably the first time in her life that this little lowly had been electrocuted by her own electric crabs. Although the damage caused by the electric sparks was almost negligible to Kang Na, this kind of self-inflicted experience made her feel extremely uncomfortable. Who is this? How come I've never seen a sword mistress like this before? Seeing Jiyu Xuanyuan's spectacular battle, and how she had completely suppressed this dragon rank Yuan Ku at the very beginning of the battle, the sword-bearers went crazy. They began to desperately search for information on Jiyu Shenyuan, and the first reaction of these sword-bearers was that this woman was at least an immortal sword-rank swordmistress. That's right. I've searched countless times on my personal terminal, but I still can't find what this sword-mistress looks like. The sword-bearers who were in charge of watching on the city wall shook their heads in exasperation. They had just used their personal terminals to search for information on the sword-mistress based on Jiyu Xuanyuan's appearance, but of course, they didn't find anything. Do you guys think that this isn't a sword-mistress, but a sword-bearer? After many fruitless searches, someone finally came up with a more reliable theory. However, most of the sword-bearers did not believe that the person Kang Na was fighting was a sword-bearer. If the other party was really a sword-bearer, then his swordsmanship was a little too terrifying. At this time, Li Xian was also standing on the city wall. He recognized Jiyu Xuanyuan's background at a glance, and he began to feel extremely fortunate that he hadn't harbored any ill intentions toward Jiyu Shenyuan just now. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to reap any benefits from her. On the other hand, in the underground shelter, when Ma Yun, Long Xiaoya, Liu Anna, and the other tenants that Guhan hadn't seen for a long time were also watching all the battles that were happening on the battlefield through the shelter's television system in shock. "Mom, why do I feel that this woman looks very much like Master?" Long Xiaoya whispered to Wen Ma Yun. After not appearing for more than 3 years, the current Long Xiaoya had already broken away from her immature state. She had become a plump and attractive peach just like her mother. Chapter 1103. Baddie. Kang Na, with her jet-black hair, pointed at Jiyu Shenyuan and scolded. Then, with a flash of lightning on her body, all the scars on her body disappeared in an instant, and Kang Na once again turned back into that lively and adorable pure white lowly. What a powerful self-healing ability! Jiyu Shenyuan saw that Kang Na had returned to her original appearance in an instant, and exclaimed in admiration. It couldn't be helped, as a flood-level Yuan Ku, and also a giant dragon with the strongest physique among the Yuan Ku, possessing such a self-healing ability was not a rare thing. But just having a self-healing ability isn't enough. You have to be able to keep up with my sword. Jiyu Xuanyuan's mouth revealed a trace of a cold smile. Kang Na, who had just returned to normal, had yet to react to what had happened, and in the next moment, Jiyu Shenyuan had already rushed to Kang Na's side, and the Execute Immortal sword in her hand directly chopped towards Kang Na's small neck. Kang Na hurriedly wanted to use her own fist to block the Execute Immortal sword in Jiyu Xuanyuan's hand, but the moment Kang Na's fist moved, the Execute Immortal sword in Jiyu Xuanyuan's hand nimbly changed its move, and directly avoided Kang Na's fist, and the blade of the sword still chopped towards Kang Na's neck. Ouch! Kang Na cried out in pain, and in an instant, a deep milky white bloodstain appeared on her neck. This bloodstain was deeper and bigger than any of the wounds that Kang Na had received in the past, and this was also the first time that Kang Na had let out a cry of pain. From this, it could be seen that the damage caused to Kang Na by this sword was not to be underestimated. Big baddie. Kang Na will hammer you to death. Kang Na once again brandished her small fist, and used a set of Kang Ne's chaotic cloak fist technique, wanting to use her own fist to hammer Jiyu Shenyuan to death. Don't look at how Kang Ne's fist was only the size of a juzi, but each of her fists carried the power of thousands of katis. If one of her fists were to land on something, it was likely that it could directly bend a 1-meter thick steel plate. As long as a fist truly landed on Jiyu Xuanyuan's body, Jiyu Shenyuan, who did not have the protection of a personal shield, would become half-crippled even if she didn't die. This is really a fist technique that only a little kid can use. With a glance, Jiyu Shenyuan knew that Kang Ne's Kang Ne brand chaotic cloak fist technique posed no threat to her. Although her fists were full of power, it was no different from the punches of a primary school student. However, it couldn't be said that Kang Ne brand chaotic cloak fist technique was useless. At the very least, Kang Ne's fists were very fast, so fast that ordinary people couldn't even see the after images, as if Kang Ne's arms didn't exist. Break. Facing Kang Ne's fist technique, Jiyu Shenyuan couldn't be bothered to use any sword techniques. She directly targeted a few of Kang Ne's fatal flaws, and used the Zhuxian sword to poke a few times. Kang Ne's chaotic cloak wind fist technique was unable to continue, and she was directly sent flying by Jiyu Xuanyuan's sword. The pure white lowly appearance that she had just recovered became badly battered, and there were even a dozen wounds faintly appearing on her body. What happened just now? The other sword-bearers on the city wall looked on with bewilderment. In their eyes, the battle was like this. Kang Ne went up. Kang Ne had a huge advantage. Kang Ne was sent flying amidst the cheers and laughter. From start to finish, these sword-bearers couldn't even understand how Jiyu Shenyuan had used her sword. And Kang Ne, who was sent flying, was not discouraged. She pounced at Jiyu Shenyuan again, and the two of them became entangled in the air. Because the speed of the battle between the two of them was really too fast, other than sword immortal Ling Shu, who could just barely see some clues, the other sword-bearers couldn't see any details. They could only see Kang Ne being sent flying again and then unyieldingly clashing with Jiyu Shenyuan again and again. Jiyu Shenyuan and Kang Ne battled like this for about 8 hours, but the battle was still in a stalemate. The sword-bearers on the city wall were still watching with great interest in the first few minutes, but after a few minutes, their eyes felt unbearably tired. After a few more minutes, they completely lost interest in the battle in the sky, and could only helplessly pray in their hearts that the battle in the sky would quickly end. This is a competition of endurance between the two of them. Only sword immortal Ling Shu kept his eyes fixed unwaveringly on the battle in the sky during these 8 hours, and he explained to the other sword-bearers beside him, young Mistress Jiyu Xuanyuan's swordsmanship is far more powerful than this giant dragon's, but this giant dragon's strength is also far above young Mistress Jiyu Xuanyuan's. The strengths of the two cancel each other out, so the two of them are in a stalemate for a while, and they are beginning to compete in endurance. The moment the physical strength of the one who can no longer hold on, the winner of this battle will be decided. Sword immortal Ling Shu concluded. Then, my lord, who do you think will be the first to give up? The surrounding sword-bearers immediately asked with concern, and a microphone was also pointed at sword immortal Ling Shu at the same time. This microphone belonged to the official television station of Yuzhang City. At a time like this, only the official television station with the strongest background had the ability to broadcast this difficult battle live. Not long after Jiyu Shenyuan and Kang Ne fell into a stalemate, the official television station of Yuzhang City began to interview sword immortal Ling Shu. At the same time, sword immortal Ling Shu also temporarily took on the role of a commentator for the battle, and began to explain the battle. It was also through sword immortal Ling Shu that the others learned that this powerful sword-bearer who had suddenly appeared was called Jiyu Shenyuan. And the other end of this microphone was connected to the countless television series in the core area, as well as the underground sanctuary. Over 40 million people in Yuzhang City were waiting in front of their televisions at the same time, constantly praying in their hearts that this young mistress Jiyu Shenyuan who had suddenly appeared would be able to save their Yuzhang City. Although I don't want to admit it, I have to say that the giant dragon has a higher chance of winning. Sword immortal Ling Shu sighed. After all, the opponent is a giant dragon. Its physical strength, endurance, and recovery ability are all incomparable to humans. If this continues, I'm afraid that young Mistress Jiyu Shenyuan will eventually run out of physical strength and retreat. Sigh, sigh, sigh. Hearing Sword Immortal Ling Shu say this, tens of millions of sighs rang out at the same time in Yuzhang City. They all felt that Sword Immortal Ling Shu was right. How could a human compete with a giant dragon in endurance? But soon, reality proved that Sword Immortal Ling Shu's words were both right and wrong. He was right because after this extremely boring stalemate lasted for 8.5 hours, one party finally could no longer endure such a battle of endurance and jumped out of the battlefield. And he was wrong because the party who jumped out was not the spirit sword level swordbearer Jiyu Shenyuan, who was far weaker than her opponent, but Kang Na. This powerful flood stage Yuan Ku, who also had the recovery ability of a giant dragon, Kang Na, the Thunder Dragon, was the first to give up. After these 2.5 hours of fierce battle, Kang Na still looked like a clean and pure little lowly. But anyone with a discerning eye could see that Kang Na seemed to be a little unsteady even in her hovering state. Her body swayed, like a drone with low battery, and could fall from the sky at any time. Oh no! Kang Na fainted from hunger. Kang Na patted her little belly, and a gurgling sound like a tire deflating instantly rang through the entire sky. Not to mention the swordbearers standing on the city wall, even the ordinary people hiding in the underground shelters seemed to have heard the gurgling sound coming from the sky. No wonder it was this giant dragon who gave up in the end. Looks like she really can't stand the hunger anymore. Only then did the swordbearers come to a sudden realization and began to discuss. They were just wondering why this giant dragon was the first to give up. It turned out that it was because she was hungry. It seemed that Miss Jiyu Shenyuan was really very lucky. In fact, these swordbearers didn't know that Jiyu Shenyuan actually didn't use much strength in this battle. Throughout the whole process, Jiyu Shenyuan was using the 9 swords of mysterious heaven technique to borrow strength to fight strength. Most of the strength she used in the battle with Kang Na just now came from Kang Na's own strength. Who asked this little lowly's fist technique to be a little too bad? If it weren't for the fact that the giant dragon's skin was too rough and thick, and that Jiyu Shenyuan was 2 ranks lower than her, Jiyu Shenyuan would have already played this little lowly to death. But what made Jiyu Shenyuan feel a little strange was why this little lowly kept fighting her in close combat. As a thunder and lightning dragon, thunder and lightning was what she was really good at. Just like how she used endless thunder and lightning to deal with Yuzhang City's dimensional barrier and those electric sparks that could paralyze people, thunder and lightning should be Kang Na's specialty. Why didn't she use what she was good at and fight with a disadvantage that she didn't know at all? At this time, the sky had already turned golden, which meant that the moon was about to pass and the sun would rise from the sky again. The battle between Jiyu Shenyuan and Kang Na had also lasted for a night. The sun gradually rose from behind Jiyu Shenyuan. Under the golden sunlight, coupled with Jiyu Shenyuan's beautiful face, she was like a sun goddess. Every swordbearer who saw this scene couldn't help but be intoxicated. At the same time, the image of Jiyu Shenyuan was deeply imprinted in their minds. Such a scene of the sun goddess was probably something they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Later, a few years later, a swordbearer who was only in his 20s picked up a paintbrush and painted this scene in his heart. As a result, it became one of the most valuable paintings of mankind in one fell swoop. The price was constantly raised by later generations of humans, and its status was simply several levels higher than Van Gogh's sunflowers. It's time to end the battle. Jiyu Shenyuan shook the Zhuxian sword in his hand. At the same time, he calculated the remaining sword essence in his body and found that there was still about 70% left. It was enough for him to use that move from the Chaos Sword art. Jiyu Shenyuan was confident that as long as he used that move, even if the person in front of him was the powerful Yuan Ku, he would most likely lose his life here. Because this move was really too powerful. It was so powerful that Kanzu Fleeting Year Calendar, who helped him create this move, couldn't help but praise it. If Guhan could reach the peak of Fleeting Year Calendar's sword essence level, it would be impossible for Fleeting Year Calendar to take on this move. There was even a great chance that he would die under this move. This was not a move that should appear in the human world. This move was also the source of Jiyu Shenyuan's confidence. Even if Jiyu Shenyuan didn't synchronize with the Zhuxian sword, He was confident that he could use this move to repel Kang Na. Now that he had the Zhuxian sword in his hand, Kang Na, this unlucky little lowly, would probably really die under Jiyu Xuanyuan's sword. In fact, Jiyu Shenyuan didn't want to expose this move too early. Whether it was for Yuan Ku or for the human race, it was not a good thing to expose this move now. Unfortunately, Yuzhang City was in danger, and there were hundreds of thousands of Yuan Ku's army coveting Yuzhang City. Jiyu Shenyuan didn't care about exposing his trump card. He only wanted to kill Kang Na as soon as possible, and then deal with the incoming Yuan Ku's army. Hun! Gui! Jiyu Xuanyuan's aura gradually rose to its peak. The sword essence in his body also poured into the Zhuxian sword. This peerless move was about to explode. Oh no! I surrender. Kang Na suddenly put her hands under her skirt and took off her cotton underwear. She hung it high on the two silver horns on her head and said pitifully, I don't want to fight anymore. I surrender. This powerful river-level Yuan bandit actually surrendered. Chapter 1104. Seeing Kang Na's pitiful surrender, Jiyu Shenyuan hesitated for a moment, then suddenly asked Sword Immortal Ling Shu on the city wall, Senior Ling Shu, how many people from Yuzhang City died at the hands of this lightning dragon in this battle? Jiyu Shenyuan didn't know whether to accept Kang Na's surrender, so she could only ask Sword Immortal Ling Shu. At the same time, in Jiyu Xuanyuan's heart, if many people died at Kang Na's hands, then Jiyu Shenyuan would never accept Kang Na's surrender. Even if it meant revealing her trump card, she would kill this lightning dragon and avenge the casualties in Yuzhang City. Wait, let me ask the higher-level artificial intelligence. Sword Immortal Ling Shu was stunned for a moment, then hurriedly asked the higher-level artificial intelligence about the casualties in Yuzhang City. Because every human was wearing a personal terminal, once a human died, the personal terminal would immediately detect the human's death, and then pass this information to the higher-level artificial intelligence. Therefore, the higher-level artificial intelligence should have the most comprehensive death statistics right now. The higher-level artificial intelligence reacted very quickly, and within 2 or 3 seconds, it had already accurately transmitted the death toll to Sword Immortal Ling Shu. When Sword Immortal Ling Shu received this death toll, his eyes instantly widened, as if he had seen an extremely terrifying number. What's wrong? Are the casualties in Yuzhang City very heavy? Jiyu Shenyuan asked as she raised the slaying immortal sword in her hand. No, or rather, it's the opposite. Sword Immortal Ling Shu had an expression that said he didn't know what to say. In the entire process of the battle just now, a total of more than 1,300 people died in Yuzhang City. So many people died at her hands. Hearing this number, Jiyu Shenyuan was instantly enraged, and prepared to continue fighting with Kang Na. Although more than 1,300 people died in Yuzhang City, according to the detection of the personal terminal, almost all of these 1,300 people died of illness. Only 3 people died in a car accident when the super-dimensional wall protection system collapsed. Only these 3 people can be said to have been killed by this Yuan Ku. That's right, there's also 1 person who died. Sword Immortal Ling Shu said with a bitter smile. He also didn't dare to believe that no one was directly killed by this Yuan Ku after such a huge battle. As for Sword Immortal Ling Shu's final name, he was naturally referring to Shijua Yuan, who had died at the hands of Jiyu Shenyuan. Those 3 were stupid. They can't blame it on Yuan Ku. Jiyu Shenyuan unceremoniously determined the fate of the 3 idiots who died in the car accident. If it wasn't for the fact that this data was provided by the highest level artificial intelligence, Jiyu Shenyuan would find it hard to believe this result. But thinking about it carefully, most of the dragon's attacks were directed at Yuzhang City's dimensional barrier and did not cause any direct damage to the sword wielder. Only when the super-dimensional wall system collapsed did some attacks land on the streets of Yuzhang City. But at that time, ordinary people had already hidden in the underground shelters through the refuge system and were not injured by the damage to Yuzhang City. There were some sword wielders who were injured by the falling buildings when they retreated from the outer city wall to the core area, or were directly hit by the scattered lightning. However, the sword bearers kept their shields activated at all times. 1 or 2 falling buildings and lightning bolts would not cause fatal damage to these sword bearers. It seemed that it was possible for Yuzhang City to have 0 casualties. Count yourself lucky. Jiyu Shenyuan thought for a while, then directly dispersed the sword essence that had already condensed in the slaying immortal sword. Although this meant that if Jiyu Shenyuan wanted to use this move again, she would have to spend more time condensing the sword essence, but this was not a big deal for Jiyu Shenyuan. She still wanted to take a gamble. Immediately afterward, Jiyu Shenyuan slowly approached Kang Na. Sword Immortal Ling Shu saw through Jiyu Xuanyuan's intention and immediately warned her loudly, "Miss Shenyuan, don't be careless. These Yuan Ku are extremely cunning. Don't fall for their tricks. It's fine. He's just a loser, he doesn't have the ability to plot against me." Jiyu Shenyuan said calmly, the arrogance in her words soaring to the heavens. All the sword-bearers who heard her couldn't help but feel impressed. Just how much confidence did this Miss Jiyu Shenyuan have in herself to be able to say such words? Here. When Jiyu Shenyuan was only half a person's distance away from Kang Na, this Kang Na very obediently took off the pure cotton underwear hanging from her dragon horn and reluctantly handed it to Jiyu Shenyuan. Then, she hugged her head and said, "Oh no. I surrender, what do I want this thing for?" Jiyu Xuanyuan's eyebrows twitched. She held the pure cotton underwear in her hands, not knowing what to do. "This is what Thor told me. Thor said that if we are defeated by humans, we have to hand over our underwear to the humans. That way, the humans will let us go," Kang Na said in a soft voice. It was impossible to tell that she was the giant dragon who had just almost destroyed Yuzhang City. "Miss Jiyu Shenyuan, I'll give you 50 million RMB, sell this underwear to me." Jiyu Shenyuan didn't know what to do with the underwear in her hands, but the sword-bearers on the city wall had entered a state of frenzy. They shouted for Jiyu Shenyuan to sell her cotton underwear to them. In one breath, they pushed the price up to 50 million RMB. Moreover, the price was still rising. Vaguely, it was about to break through 100 million RMB. This Thor is definitely not a decent giant dragon. Jiyu Shenyuan ridiculed in her heart, and then hurriedly returned the underwear to Kang Na. Seeing Jiyu Shenyuan return the underwear to her, Kang Na instantly became tearful. Is this lord not willing to accept Kang Na's surrender? Kang Na is so hungry, Kang Na really can't fight anymore. "I didn't say that I won't accept your surrender. Put on the underwear first, otherwise it will be cold down there." Jiyu Xuanyuan's face was taut. She once again stuffed the underwear into Kang Na's hands. Kang Na didn't refuse this time. She obediently put on the underwear in front of Jiyu Shenyuan. Amid her, the moment Kang Na lifted up her skirt, Jiyu Shenyuan even saw Kang Na's snow-white, hairless mound. My goodness, Jiyu Shenyuan almost couldn't control herself. She could only constantly warn herself in her heart. Jiyu Shenyuan, you have to remember, the one in front of you is not a lowly, but a giant dragon. You are not Guhan now, but Jiyu Shenyuan. You must not have any crooked thoughts. Why did you surrender? Although Jiyu Shenyuan had already believed the authenticity of Kang Na's surrender, she still couldn't help but ask. That just now shouldn't have been your real strength. You can obviously continue to fight. Why did you surrender? Kang Na said that Kang Na's stomach is hungry. Kang Na touched her flat belly. Kang Na is really hungry. I don't have the strength to fight with you anymore. Then what about your lightning? Jiyu Shenyuan asked again. The electricity is all used up. Kang Na swung her slender tail in front of her and placed that furry little ball into Jiyu Xuanyuan's hands. She said pitifully, "You see, there is only 1% battery left. If Kang Na doesn't recharge it, it will automatically shut down." Only then did Jiyu Shenyuan notice that the furry ball on Kang Na's tail was actually a battery indicator. Pushing aside the fur on the ball, she could see the shape of a battery. At this time, the battery's state was the same as the battery indicator on an old-fashioned mobile phone. The battery was empty except for a pixel-sized green bar. Beside the battery, there was a clear 1% character. You really lost your ability to fight. Jiyu Shenyuan touched her nose and thought for a moment. Then you can escape. With your speed, if you escape with all your might, I definitely won't be able to catch up to you. I won't escape. I won't escape. Kang Na shook her tail repeatedly. Kang Na searched for a long time. And found that there is food here. Xiao Lin said that as long as I surrender, I will have food to eat. Where's Kang Na's food? My goodness, she just surrendered and she already directly asked Jiyu Shenyuan for food. It seems that the ultimate purpose of this little lowly surrender was to get the food she wanted. What do you want to eat? Jiyu Shenyuan raised this question that had been bothering her for a long time. She really didn't know what this little lowly Kang Na wanted to eat that made her so stubbornly pester Yuzhong City. Could it be that Yuzhong City really had some unique food? I don't know. Kang Na lowered her head in frustration and played with her fingers. I only know that there is food in the eggshell, but I don't know what the food is. But Kang Na promises that as long as you let Kang Na in, Kang Na will definitely find Kang Na's food. Let you in? Jiyu Xuanyuan's brows furrowed even tighter. What kind of joke was this? This was a flood-level Yuan Ku, and the dimensional wall in the core area was the last barrier in the core area of Yuzhong City. Once this flood-level Yuan Ku was let in, if she went on a killing spree and unleashed her lightning, even Jiyu Shenyuan wouldn't be able to do anything to Kang Na. At that time, Yuzhong City would lose at least tens of thousands of lives. Senior Sword Immortal Ling Shu, does our Yuzhong City have any talismans or equipment that can restrain a flood-level Yuan Ku? It was definitely impossible to bring Kang Na into the core area of Yuzhong City, but Jiyu Shenyuan remembered that there was some special equipment in the Yuan Ku Research Institute that could restrain Yuan Ku. As long as these special equipment were worn on Yuan Ku's power would be completely restrained. In this way, the core area of Yuzhong City shouldn't be in any danger. I'm not sure about this either. Let me ask the dean there. Sword Immortal Ling Shu seemed to have become Jiyu Xuanyuan's errand boy. Just now, he helped Jiyu Shenyuan ask about the number of deaths, and now he was helping Jiyu Shenyuan with the problem of restraining the equipment. After a while, Sword Immortal Ling Shu excitedly told Jiyu Shenyuan that there was indeed a piece of equipment in the Research Institute that could control a flood-level Yuan Ku. Then, he handed a collar, a saddle, and a rein to Jiyu Shenyuan. Together, these three items formed the equipment to control a flood-level Yuan Ku. Chapter 1105. Are you trying to make me a dragon knight? Guhan couldn't help but complain as he looked at the saddle-like Yuan Ku control device in his hand. This was found in the warehouse of the Research Institute. I don't know when it was made, but according to the information in the highest level of artificial intelligence, this set of equipment can indeed completely restrain a flood-level Yuan Ku and control her power to the standard of an ordinary person. Sword Immortal Ling Shu explained on the city wall. Guhan also remembered at this time that he seemed to have seen information about this set of equipment when he was the Sword Pavilion Master. It was just that the equipment had already existed in the Yuzhong City Research Institute when the highest level of artificial intelligence was established. Because it was too old, Yuzhong City couldn't find any information about this set of equipment. However, Jendi of Yuzhong City had once used this set of equipment to do an experiment, and it was indeed able to control a flood-level Yuan Ku, so it was recorded in the highest level of artificial intelligence. However, since the Sword Emperor's death, Yuzhong City no longer had the opportunity to capture the run-level Yuan bandit alive, so this set of equipment had been lying in the Research Institute to collect dust. It wasn't until today that Ji Yuhan took it out. This is a set of equipment that can completely restrain your power. You can either put on this set of equipment and follow me into the city, or leave Yuzhong City immediately. It's your choice. Seeing that Kang Na didn't hurt anyone in Yuzhong City, and at the same time took the initiative to surrender to him, Guhan decided to give Kang Na a chance to choose. If Guhan was Kang Na, he would never seal all his power and then take the initiative to put his fate in the hands of the enemy. Let the enemy decide his fate. Therefore, Ji Yuhan believed that Kang Na would be the same as him. She would never put on this saddle-like equipment just to get some food from others. But after all, Guhan was not Kang Na, and he could never understand Kang Na's thinking. So when Kang Na happily put on the saddle and took the initiative to hand the other end of the reins to Jiyu Shenyuan, Guhan could only helplessly fulfill his promise and bring the dragon into the core area. Miss Jiyu Shenyuan, Are you really planning on bringing this huge dragon into the city? Sword Immortal Ling Shu asked with a helpless expression as he watched Jiyu Shenyuan lead Kang Na toward the core region. What happened? Jiyu Shenyuan nodded her head and said in a strange tone, this Yuan Ku's power has been completely restricted. She is no different from an ordinary person. You don't have to worry about the safety of the core area. I'm not worried about the safety of the core area, but Miss Jiyu Shenyuan, how do you plan to bring this Yuan Ku in? Sword Immortal Ling Shu smiled even more bitterly. He pointed at the dimensional wall above his head and said, you also know that Yuan Ku will definitely not be able to pass through the dimensional wall system. Not even a small door can be opened. The only way to bring Yuan Ku into the dimensional wall system is to directly shut off the dimensional wall system, or to have the Sword Pavilion Master bring along an Emperor Sword rank Sword Lady to cut off the interference of the dimensional wall system. But right now, an army of hundreds of thousands of Yuan Ku can attack at any time, and once the dimensional wall system is shut off, it will take at least a day before it can be reactivated. Of course, we can't shut off the dimensional wall system just to let this Yuan Ku in. And the Sword Pavilion Master is nowhere to be found. Without the Sword Pavilion Master, there is no way he can mobilize the Emperor Sword rank Sword Lady in the Sword Pavilion. So, Miss Jiyu Shenyuan, do you think we should first arrange for this Yuan Ku to be somewhere in the normal area, and when the battle is over and Yuan Ku has retreated, we can shut off the dimensional wall system and then let this Yuan Ku in? Sword Immortal Ling Shu asked after some discussion. Oh no. Without waiting for Jiyu Shenyuan to speak, Kang Na tugged on the reins hanging around her neck, and looked at Jiyu Shenyuan with an incredibly pitiful gaze. Oh no. I'm really going to starve to death, sigh. What else could Jiyu Shenyuan say? With a wave of her hand, she put Kang Na into her dimensional pocket, and then directly landed beside Sword Immortal Ling Shu, and released Kang Na from the dimensional pocket. Miss Shenyuan, you. Sword Immortal Ling Shu pointed a finger at Jiyu Shenyuan, and the words were stuck in his throat. He had just solemnly vowed that there was no way to let Kang Na in without shutting off the dimensional wall system, but in the next second, Jiyu Shenyuan brought Kang Na in, and it was like a slap to Sword Immortal Ling Shu's face. Have you forgotten? The sword ladies of the Sword Pavilion are all in my dimensional pocket. Is there a problem if I want to bring a Yuan Ku in? Jiyu Shenyuan said indifferently, and this sentence also made Sword Immortal Ling Shu swallow his question. Sword Immortal Ling Shu had almost forgotten that Jiyu Shenyuan had already swept clean the Sword Pavilion in the Sword Pavilion, and the Emperor Sword left behind by heaven-encompassing Jendi, Yuan Tu Bai, was naturally also in Jiyu Shenyuan's hands. With this Emperor Sword, Jiyu Shenyuan could indeed temporarily block off the dimensional wall system and bring Kang Na in. But here, Jiyu Shenyuan still told a small lie. It wasn't the Emperor Sword Yuan Tu Bai that brought Kang Na in, but the Emperor Sword Shen Yuan. Jiyu Shenyuan couldn't expose the fact that the Shen Yuan sword was in her hands, because almost everyone knew that the Shen Yuan sword was actually in the hands of Gu Han. Senior Ling Shu, how far is Yuan Ku's army from Yuzhong City now? Jiyu Shenyuan asked with great concern. Now was a race against time, and not a single second could be wasted. According to our surveillance equipment on the outskirts, Yuan Ku's army is already less than 50 kilometers away from Yuzhong City. In another hour at most, Yuan Ku's army will reach the city walls of the normal district, Sword Immortal Ling Shu replied. Then what about our super-dimensional wall system? How long will it take before it can be reactivated? Jiyu Shenyuan asked again. At least another 4 hours. Sword Immortal Ling Shu immediately gave an answer. It was clear that he was also very concerned about the recovery of the super-dimensional wall system. Actually, the super-dimensional wall system has already been repaired. It's just that if we want to reactivate it, we'll have to wait for a day. In another 4 hours, that day will be up. Senior Ling Shu, I have something to say, but I'm not sure if I should say it. Jiyu Shenyuan hesitated for a moment before saying, at a time like this, there's no need to say it. Miss Shenyuan, you can say whatever you want to say. There's no need to hold back, Sword Immortal Ling Shu said. All right then, I hope that Senior Ling Shu can set an example and lead the sword-bearers of the core district to the city walls of the normal district and welcome the battle on the outermost city walls, Jiyu Shenyuan said lightly. Jiyu Shenyuan said indifferently, and at the same time, her words instantly set off a monstrous wave among the other sword-wielders. These sword-bearers didn't think that Jiyu Shenyuan would actually ask them to fight on the outermost city walls. One had to realize that the outermost city walls were no longer protected by the dimensional wall. Once Yuan Ku's army arrived, the sword-bearers would immediately have to engage in hand-to-hand combat with Yuan Ku. In this way, the sword-bearers were bound to suffer extremely heavy casualties. Jiyu Xuanyuan's words were no different from sending these sword-bearers to their deaths. Thus, when Jiyu Shenyuan said this, the entire core district city walls immediately erupted into a frenzy. Almost all the sword-bearers began to curse in low voices. They cursed at Jiyu Shenyuan for not taking their lives seriously and for wanting them to go to their deaths. There were even some sword-bearers who waved their fists at Jiyu Shenyuan and yelled at the top of their lungs. They refused to leave the core district city walls no matter what. They refused to go to the outermost city walls to die for nothing. Seeing that the situation on the walls of the core area was about to collapse, Jiyu Shenyuan, whose face was filled with rage, suddenly slashed out a sword chi towards the bottom of the wall. A skyscraper that was hundreds of stories tall was instantly turned into dust by Jiyu Xuanyuan's sword chi, letting out a heaven-shaking collapse sound. The entire city walls instantly quietened down. No one dared to say another word. Jiyu Shenyuan continued to yell, "The outermost city walls are tall and wide. They are more than 10 times the height of the core district city walls. Furthermore, there are all sorts of defensive equipment on the city walls, unlike the core district city walls which are extremely lacking in defensive equipment. That's because the core district's dimensional wall is completely unable to withstand a single blow from Yuan Ku's army. At most, it will collapse within a few hours. Compared to staying in the core district city walls and staying in the outermost city walls, the difference is only a few hours later in the hand-to-hand combat. In this way, it would be better to rely on the complete defensive facilities of the outermost city walls to fight. And most importantly, if everyone does not defend the outermost city walls, then the normal district will be completely exposed to Yuan Ku's attacks. Those Yuan Ku are very clear about the underground shelters. No matter how deep the shelters are hidden, as long as Yuan Ku wants to find them, he will definitely be discovered. The fall of an underground shelter is a disaster that will result in the extinction of 100,000 people. Do you all want to sit back and watch so many lives die in the hands of Yuan Ku? Jiyu Shenyuan glanced at all the sword-bearers around her and said in a clear voice, "Everyone enjoys privileges that far surpass ordinary people. Ordinary people are also very dissatisfied with this. We are all humans, so why can the sword-bearers ride on ordinary people? The reason is very simple. It is because the sword-bearers bear responsibilities that ordinary people do not need to bear. Since the sword-bearers enjoy the worship of ordinary people, then the sword-bearers should fight to protect the lives of ordinary people. Otherwise, everyone does not have the right to enjoy privileges that surpass ordinary people." Under Jiyu Xuanyuan's gaze, all the sword-bearers silently lowered their heads. And the ordinary people in the underground shelter who were watching the live broadcast through the television heard Jiyu Xuanyuan's words. They were so excited that they could not control themselves. Finally, there was a sword-bearer who said what was in their hearts. They endured the various privileges of the sword-bearers and dedicated all their labor for the superior life of the sword-bearers. What was it for? Of course, it was for the sword-bearers to protect their lives. When they heard the sword-bearers say that they would rather die than go to the outermost city walls to fight, everyone's heart was filled with despair. Because these people knew in their hearts that if they did not defend against Yuan Ku's army at the outermost city walls, then they who were in the underground shelter in the normal district would definitely die. So when they heard Jiyu Xuanyuan's impassioned speech, everyone was extremely excited. Jiyu Xuanyuan's perfect goddess-like image was firmly imprinted in their hearts. This also laid a solid foundation for Jiyu Xuanyuan's unparalleled popularity in Yuzhong City in the future. Chapter 1106. Miss Shen Yuan, You don't have to say any more. I'm going now. One of the ancient sword wielders, who had been complaining about not wanting to fight, raised his sword mistress in shame. He then walked down the wall of the core area without hesitation and headed for the outermost wall. The sword-bearer recalled his childhood. He was not a child of a sword-bearer family. His ancestors had never produced a sword-bearer for more than a dozen generations, so he had always lived in an extremely crowded beehive with his parents. Because his income was extremely low, he often ate the nutrient solution provided free of charge by Yuzhong City when he was a child. That tasted like wax, and he had been eating it for 10 years. But what puzzled him was that even though his family was so poor, his parents still saved up a lot of money. They used the money to buy some delicious food that he couldn't eat and stood guard at the gate of Yuzhong City. When they encountered sword-bearers who had returned from fighting outside the city, they would immediately rush up and deliver the food to the sword-bearers. When he was a child, he did not understand why they would give the money and food they had painstakingly saved up to sword-wielder who had nothing to do with them. Then his mother told him that it was because the sword-wielder was fighting outside that ordinary people like them could live safely in the city and enjoy the free nutrient solution. People had to learn to be grateful. They had to be grateful to the sword-wielder who risked their lives to fight for the safety of everyone. They had to let these sword-wielder feel the gratitude that came from being protected by them. From then on, his greatest wish in life was to become a powerful sword-wielder and protect these lovely citizens. Later on, he really became a sword-bearer, but his original intention had changed. The source of his dream of becoming a sword-bearer seemed to have dissipated completely, until today when he heard Jiyu Xuanyuan's words. He remembered the scene of his mother handing over the food that she had saved up to those sword-bearers when he was young. How can I let down these people who need my protection? Thinking of this sword-wielder could no longer bear the condemnation of his conscience. At the same time, his childhood dream burst forth, and he was the first to rush down the wall, choosing to fight for these people who needed his protection. I'm going too. A female sword-wielder immediately followed behind the previous sword-wielder. She also remembered her own past. However, she was different from the previous sword-bearer. She was born into a sword-bearer family. Her father and grandfather were both sword-bearers. However, her father and grandfather died in front of her at the same time. It was during the Great Invasion 15 years ago. In order to protect an underground shelter that Yuan Ku had found, her father and grandfather gave up the opportunity to escape and used their own bodies and sword maidens to block the entrance of the underground shelter. In the end, they perished together with the attacking Yuan Ku. She still remembered her father's last words to her before he died. Don't cry. Fight for the people you need to protect. This is the fate of every sword-bearer. She had always remembered this sentence, and it was this sentence that encouraged her to follow her grandfather and father's path and become a swordsman. In the end, she even advanced to the level of a famed swordsman. However, in the past 2 to 3 years, she had followed her superior, the sword spirit Mu Shui. She could not help but have many different thoughts. She understood what power struggles were, understood what it meant to preserve strength, and understood what it meant to be alive. She gradually sank into this atmosphere and gradually forgot her own heart. It was only at this moment when she heard Jiyu Xuanyuan's words that her heart woke up from the haze and made a real choice. The story of these two people was unique because it only happened to them. However, such stories were also stories everywhere because the core had never changed. That was the mission of the sword-bearers. Protect the people who need to be protected. Countless sword-bearers remembered their original intentions of becoming sword-bearers. They remembered the heroic words they had said when they were young. They finally woke up from their dreams and knew what they should do. Therefore, a large number of sword-bearers followed the two people and walked towards the outermost city wall. The entire Yuzhong city was finally ignited by Jiyu Xuanyuan's declaration. They remembered their original intentions and chose to protect the people who needed to be protected. You saved this city. Sword Immortal Ling Shu could not describe his current feelings. He silently walked behind Jiyu Shenyuan. It was as if Jiyu Shenyuan was the true master of Yuzhong City, an immortal sword-tier swordbearer, and he was merely a small soldier behind Jiyu Shenyuan. I did not save them, they chose to save themselves. Jiyu Xuanyuan's gaze was fixed on the horizon. They are the future of Yuzhang City. I cannot let too many of them die. It's useless. Sword Immortal Ling Shu shook his head. No matter how powerful you are only one person. You cannot deal with hundreds of thousands of yuan ku. Without the protection of the dimensional barrier, these cute little guys will all pay the price in blood. Don't we still have her? Jiyu Shenyuan hugged Kang Na, who was already dizzy from hunger, into her arms. She pouted Kang Na's cute little face. Let's go. Aren't you hungry? Anyone who had a husky before would definitely know what it felt like to be walked by a dog. The leash on the dog's leash was pulled tightly. As the owner, there was no way you could resist the strength of a sprinting husky. You could only be dragged around by the husky. Even if you accidentally fell to the ground, the husky would continue forward without a care. It was indeed a very strange feeling. Now, Jiyu Shenyuan was almost experiencing the same feeling. Kang Na, who had a pair of short and thick legs, ran quite quickly. The leash around her neck was already stretched to its limit. She dragged Jiyu Shenyuan behind her as she ran with large strides. Her own speed was almost comparable to that of a speeding car. Even Jiyu Shenyuan couldn't tell which way was north because of Kang Na. Finally, Kang Na stopped in front of a warehouse with a large skull logo on the outside. Miss Jiyu Shenyuan? Miss Jiyu Shenyuan, why are you here? Guarding the warehouse door was actually a small team of special forces armed with live nuclear weapons. It was a very rare special forces in Yuzhang City that relied on firearms to fight. Such special forces were mentioned in the previous chapter. The guns in their hands could cause harm to Yuan Ku and the sword wielder. However, with Yuan Ku's physique, if he was caught unprepared, he would not necessarily die even if he was hit by hundreds or thousands of bullets. But no matter how strong the sword wielder was, if he did not activate his personal shield and was caught unprepared, as long as he was hit by a bullet, he could possibly lose his life here. Rather than saying that such special forces were used to deal with Yuan Ku, it was more appropriate to say that they were used to deal with the sword wielder. And this place with the skull logo actually needed a whole team of special forces to guard it. It could be seen that this place must be extremely heavily guarded against the sword wielder. You guys know me. Jiyu Shenyuan found that after these special forces saw her, they showed an uncontrollable excitement and felt very strange. Miss Jiyu Shenyuan, we just heard your speech. What you've said is really great. You've spoken our hearts. If every swordbearer was as concerned about the safety of us ordinary people as you are, then even if we were to die in the hands of Yuenko, we wouldn't have any complaint. The captain of the special forces said excitedly. It turned out that this was another ordinary person who was influenced by Jiyu Xuanyuan's speech. What I said is only what every sword wielder should do, you don't have to be so excited. Jiyu Shenyuan said lightly, at the same time feeling Kang Na's desire for the things in the warehouse. Jiyu Shenyuan knew that the food that Kang Na spent so much effort to obtain must be in this warehouse. Can I go in? Jiyu Shenyuan asked the Special Forces team. I'm afraid not. The captain of the Special Forces team looked very awkward. Then what is in this warehouse? You can tell me. Jiyu Shenyuan said again. That's not a problem. The captain breathed a sigh of relief and said, this is actually the fuel warehouse of Yuzhang City's nuclear reactor. It stores thousands of tons of high-purity nuclear fuel rods. So it's nuclear fuel rods. Hearing the captain's answer, Lung Qingqiu vaguely understood what Kang Na's food was. Yuzhang City could not rely on thermal power or large river hydropower to generate electricity. Only the small but extremely efficient nuclear power could meet the electricity needs of Yuzhang City's 40 million people. In the core area of Yuzhang City, there was a super-nuclear reactor. This super-nuclear reactor consumed a lot of high-purity nuclear fuel rods to generate electricity every month to meet the electricity needs of Yuzhang City. Naturally, the core area also had a warehouse dedicated to storing high-purity nuclear fuel rods. Even after 1,000 years of highly advanced technology, nuclear fuel was still an extremely unstable substance. Once it was leaked, it could cause immeasurable harm to the citizens of Yuzhang City. That was why a large number of people were needed to guard this warehouse. At the same time, sword bearers were strictly prohibited from entering the warehouse. As for our Kang Na, as a lightning dragon, the lightning in her body could not have appeared out of thin air. From Kang Na's urgent need for nuclear fuel, it could be seen that the lightning in Kang Na's body actually came from a nuclear reaction. Kang Na herself was a super nuclear reactor, so she could have an endless supply of electricity and become a powerful lightning dragon. The truth was already in front of Jiyu Shenyuan. If she did not let Kang Na eat these nuclear fuel rods, she would not be satisfied to work for Guhan. How about this? Send a message to Sword Immortal Ling Shu and tell him that I want to go in. Don't worry, Jiyu Shenyuan said to the captain. Miss Jiyu Shenyuan, it's really dangerous inside. Even if you are a sword bearer, you will inevitably be harmed by the radiation. If we want to go in, we have to go through 3 or 4 hours of radiation protection before we can enter. Why don't you follow us to go through the radiation protection before going in? Do you think I have 3 or 4 hours for you? Jiyu Shenyuan patted the captain's shoulder. Send a message to Sword Immortal Ling Shu. He will understand. With no other choice, the team leader could only call Sword Immortal Ling Shu. After some communication between Sword Immortal Ling Shu and Jiyu Shenyuan, Sword Immortal Ling Shu finally agreed to Jiyu Xuanyuan's request. He ordered the team leader to let Jiyu Shenyuan and Kang Na into the nuclear fuel warehouse without any radiation protection. Chapter 1107. Because a nuclear leak would cause immeasurable damage to the residents of Yuzhang City, this warehouse was equipped with all kinds of defensive facilities. It looked like a huge warehouse that covered an area of more than 10 square kilometers, but 95% of this warehouse was equipped with all kinds of protective facilities. This warehouse was like a Russian matryoshka doll, with protective houses within protective houses. In the end, there were more than 20 protective houses together to finally form this nuclear fuel warehouse. The core few protective houses were all filled with lead, while the outer few protective houses were filled with all kinds of inert gases. If a normal person didn't bring an oxygen mask into the warehouse, they would directly suffocate in the warehouse. Jiyu Shenyuan didn't do any other anti-radiation treatment. She just took a set of oxygen equipment from the management room and entered the warehouse. Jiyu Shenyuan didn't feel anything in the first few protective houses, and it was no different from a normal environment. At the same time, the radiation monitoring in the protective houses was maintained at a normal level, about the same level as the radiation outside. But after entering the 11th protective house, she could clearly see that the radiation began to increase rapidly, far exceeding the normal level. When she came to the core few protective houses, Jiyu Shenyuan could even feel many extremely tiny particles that were like blades hitting her skin. These particles quickly passed through Jiyu Xuanyuan's skin, attempting to penetrate her internal organs. While these particles were trying to enter Jiyu Xuanyuan's body, they were also constantly killing all the normal cells they encountered along the way. Jiyu Shenyuan soon felt that all the functions of his body were rapidly deteriorating, and it seemed like it wouldn't be long before he would die in the warehouse. The radiation problem is really a big problem, Jiyu Shenyuan sighed. Her experiment with nuclear radiation had come to an end. Sword Qi flew out from the slaying immortal sword in her hand, and then completely surrounded Jiyu Shenyuan, helping Jiyu Shenyuan to come into contact with the radiation. Originally, the sword wielder's personal protective shield was the best protection against nuclear radiation. The reason why Sword Immortal Ling Shu allowed Jiyu Shenyuan to directly enter the warehouse without any prior protection was because he felt that with the personal protective shield, Jiyu Shenyuan wouldn't have too much of a problem. However, what Sword Immortal Ling Shu didn't know was that Jiyu Shenyuan was currently in a semi-synchronized state with the slaying immortal sword, so she couldn't replace the other sword maidens at all. Furthermore, the slaying immortal sword itself couldn't provide a personal shield, so Jiyu Shenyuan could only use extremely complicated sword intent defensive measures to just barely keep the radiation at bay. However, the sword chi protection method was ultimately not as perfect as the personal shield, so there was still some radiation that penetrated the sword chi protection and entered Jiyu Xuanyuan's body, killing the cells in Jiyu Xuanyuan's body, seemingly trying to trigger some DNA mutations. Seeing that the situation was a bit off, Guhan couldn't help but feel a bit regretful. He had been a bit too confident in his own strength, causing him to suffer a setback. Just as Guhan was considering how to deal with the radiation, the immortal execution sword, which had been silent all this while, suddenly spoke up in surprise. Chaos Chi? There's actually chaotic energy here. Wow! Your sword can actually speak. The immortal execution sword's words didn't matter much, but it gave Kang Na, who was following beside Jiyu Shenyuan, a fright. Come to think of it, this little guy had fought quite a few times with the sword maidens, yet he was even surprised by the fact that the sword maidens could speak. As she spoke, Kang Na squatted down beside the immortal execution sword curiously. She used her little finger to tap the blade of the immortal execution sword, and said softly, "Can we be friends? I have no interest in making friends with a Western bug like you." The immortal execution sword said disdainfully, but Kang Na didn't get angry. Instead, she stared at the immortal execution sword curiously. "What chaotic energy are you talking about? What's chaotic energy?" Jiyu Shenyuan took Kang Na into her arms, so that Kang Na wouldn't disturb the immortal execution sword. Chaotic energy is the air of the entire world before Pangu separated heaven and earth. It is also the most primitive, most chaotic, most violent, and most stable energy in the world. Before Pangu separated heaven and earth, all the carnate demon gods relied on chaotic energy to cultivate. Afterwards, after Pangu separated heaven and earth, chaotic energy gradually disappeared from the world. Only then did cultivators start to cultivate in the so-called immortal Tao, demon Tao, and Buddhist Tao. What they used were merely variations of chaotic energy. True experts only cultivated chaotic energy. The celestial slaying sword explained, and this explanation inadvertently revealed a secret from ancient times. I remember that a portion of chaotic energy was condensed within the soil, eventually forming a solid form and hiding underground. I didn't think that you humans would actually excavate the solid form of chaotic energy, and even use it as an energy source. If those fellows from thousands of years ago were to know about this, I wonder what kind of expression they would have, the immortal execution sword said with a hint of self-mockery. Sometimes, I really can't understand this world. Hearing the words of the immortal execution sword, Jiyu Xuanyuan's face was filled with helplessness. Wasn't it said that the human world before the Great Calamity didn't have any power that surpassed nature? Everything was just superstition. But there's the Wu people, the demon race, and the chaotic energy you speak of. What was the earth like before the Great Calamity? The Wu people, the demon race, and the gods and Buddhas you speak of, are they imaginary visitors from the second dimension, or did they really exist in history? Is our existence not enough to prove that it's real? The blade of the immortal execution sword trembled. I don't want to talk about what happened back then, but I can at least guarantee you that all the sword ladies are real. Otherwise, they wouldn't be protecting this world. All right. Jiyu Shenyuan nodded thoughtfully. Since you said that this nuclear radiation is the so-called chaotic energy, then do you know how to deal with this chaotic energy? My body is already somewhat unable to withstand it. Chaotic energy can only be refined into one's own essence chi when one's cultivation reaches an extremely high level. Although your current strength is comparable to some peak fiend gods, in the end, you still have to borrow the power of the sword ladies. It's impossible for you to refine this chaotic energy with your own cultivation. However, I can teach you a way to store the chaotic energy so that it won't harm your body. After the immortal execution sword finished speaking, it transmitted an extremely complicated and cumbersome method to Guhan's mind through its thoughts. Guhan was indeed a genius. He only needed to go through such a complicated and cumbersome method 3 or 4 times in his mind to understand most of it. He began to circulate it according to the method. As expected, the radiation that pervaded his body, which was also the chaotic energy in the mouth of the immortal execution sword, was controlled. Just as he was about to gather all the chaotic energy in his lower dantian according to the method in the method, suddenly, Guhan felt a purple aura flash through his body, absorbing all the chaotic energy that Guhan had painstakingly controlled. Then, the purple aura disappeared without a trace, as if it didn't exist in Guhan's body at all. I remember now. This seems to be something that fleeting maple put into my body. Guhan suddenly remembered that when he had first arrived at Radiance Amusement Park, he had met the stabilizer of another world, military governor Fleeting Maple. And this military governor had placed something called primordial purple aura into his body, saying that it would help him in the future. However, after the primordial purple aura entered Guhan's body, it could no longer be found. Guhan specially searched for it a few times, but to no avail. Only then did he gradually forget about the primordial purple aura. He didn't expect that at this moment, the primordial purple aura would appear on its own and absorb all the chaotic energy that Guhan had painstakingly accumulated. Immortal Execution Sword Lady. The primordial energy that I was controlling was all absorbed by the primordial purple aura. Will there be any danger? Although he didn't think there was any danger, Guhan still asked the Immortal Execution Sword to be on the safe side. The primordial purple aura is the mother of the great Tao. It can absorb anything. The Immortal Execution Sword stopped mid-sentence. After a long while, it said in disbelief, "What did you say? What did you say absorbed your chaotic energy? Why? Is there something special about this primordial purple aura?" Seeing the Immortal Execution Sword's reaction, Guhan sensitively realized that the primordial purple aura wasn't as simple as he had imagined. "Are you sure that's the primordial purple aura?" The Immortal Execution Sword asked in disbelief. "I'm not sure." Guhan shook his head. "The person who gave it to me told me that it's called the primordial purple aura. As for whether it's really the primordial purple aura, I don't know either. I hope it's true." The Immortal Execution Sword took a deep breath. "If that's the case, you might really be able to fight those thieves. By the way, remove your sword chi defense. The chaotic energy is good for the primordial purple aura," the Immortal Execution Sword added. While Guhan and the Immortal Execution Sword were talking, Jiyu Shenyuan finally arrived at the last door. At this time, according to the radiation warning in the safe house, the radiation here had reached tens of thousands of times the normal level. Any human who came here without protection would instantly die in less than 3 seconds, and then turn into a pile of protein that would never rot. According to the Immortal Execution Sword's instructions, Jiyu Shenyuan took the risk to remove the sword chi defense. A large amount of radiation rushed into Jiyu Shenyuan's body without any obstruction. Under the effect of the secret art that the Immortal Execution Sword gave to Jiyu Shenyuan, it was quickly gathered by Jiyu Shenyuan and then swallowed by the primordial purple aura. At the same time, because the primordial purple aura kept appearing, Guhan could finally feel the existence of the primordial purple aura more clearly. The feeling of this primordial purple aura gave Guhan a very strange feeling. It was clearly just a chi, but for Guhan, it was like a world with life and rules. Chapter 1108. Putting aside his thoughts about the primordial violet gas and chaotic gas for the moment, Jiyu Shenyuan was surprised to find that in this radiation warehouse that was enough to kill any human, Kang Na was like a fish in water, as if the radiation did not exist. "Kang Na, do you feel the radiation around you?" Jiyu Shenyuan asked Kang Na, "Do you feel any discomfort?" "Yes." Kang Na nodded vigorously. After smelling this fragrance, Kang Na is even hungrier. Well, it seemed like the radiation did not have any negative effects on Kang Na. Thinking about it carefully, this was a very normal thing. After all, Kang Na ate high-purity nuclear fuel rods as food. How could she be afraid of the radiation emitted by these food? The last door of the warehouse slowly opened, and the final warehouse used to store the high-purity nuclear fuel rods finally appeared in front of Jiyu Shenyuan. Silver-white high-purity nuclear fuel rods were inserted into the fuel racks made of lead, leaving only a silver-white handle exposed outside. As long as the handle was pulled, the nuclear fuel rods could be taken out. Roughly estimating with the naked eye, there were more than 100,000 high-purity nuclear fuel rods inserted into the rows of racks. From Jiyu Shenyuan's point of view, it looked like neatly arranged beehives, or like an ice shelf filled with popsicles. Incredible! After Kang Na saw the high-purity nuclear fuel rods, her entire dragon seemed to be so happy that she almost fainted. If not for Jiyu Shenyuan's tight grip on Kang Na's reins, Kang Na would have already pounced on these high-purity nuclear fuel rods and gorged herself. "Let me go. I want to eat." Kang Na struggled with all her might, but unfortunately, Under the confinement of this set of confinement equipment, Kang Na was just a little lowly with a little bit of strength, unable to break free from Jiyu Xuanyuan's grasp. "Can we discuss something?" Jiyu Shenyuan hugged Kang Na in her arms and said with a face full of smiles. "Can we eat after we've discussed it?" Kang Na's small eyes rolled up and down, looking impatient. "Yes." Jiyu Shenyuan nodded, then whispered in Kang Na's ear. "Incredible." Kang Na pouted and said, "Speak human language." Jiyu Shenyuan slapped Kang Na's dragon butt. "No problem." Kang Na revealed a sharp, "leave everything to me" expression. Before the Great Apocalypse, the uranium-235 content of nuclear reactor fuel rods was about 3%, which was considered an extremely low-purity fuel rod. However, the super-nuclear reactor used in Yuzhong City was different. This nuclear reactor required nuclear fuel rods with a content of more than 95% uranium-235 to work properly. This was also a high-purity nuclear fuel rods. Every single nuclear fuel rod taken out of this warehouse and placed in the outside world could instantly kill off all the humans in the building. The population of the entire core area would be affected, and in the next 50 years, tens of millions of deformed children might be born. This was a very frightening outcome. Moreover, these high-purity nuclear fuel rods could not be stored in a dimensional pocket. A high-purity nuclear fuel rod could completely destroy the spatial structure of a dimensional pocket within 3 days, turning the dimensional pocket into an ordinary pocket. The items originally stored in the pocket would also completely disappear from the dimensional space. Therefore, humans would build a special physical warehouse to store high-purity nuclear fuel rods. Otherwise, it would be better to just store them in a dimensional pocket, which was safe and didn't take up too much space. Such a terrifying high-purity nuclear fuel rod that even a dimensional pocket couldn't deal with was no different from a popsicle sold for 1 yuan in a store in Kang Na's hands. Kang Na's small hand would often grab more than 10 high-purity nuclear fuel rods at the same time, and then stuffed them all into her mouth in one breath. Right, Kang Na's mouth was also very special. It usually looked small, and even her fist couldn't fit in it. But when eating these fuel rods, Kang Na's mouth opened to the size of a volleyball, and in one bite, she bit off half of the long nuclear fuel rod, and in 2 bites, she ate all of it into her stomach. Jiyu Shenyuan was too lazy to care about Kang Na, who was eating heartily. She walked alone to a row of fuel rods and pulled out a nuclear fuel rod. Even though she was holding the handle made of lead at the back of the fuel rod, Jiyu Shenyuan felt a burning pain in her fingers, as if she was holding a burning wooden stick in her hand. Jiyu Shenyuan tentatively put one of her fingers directly on the high-purity nuclear fuel rod, but her finger instantly lost all feeling. The finger that was originally full of flesh and blood seemed to have touched a high-temperature popsicle, and began to melt rapidly, and finally became a puddle of rancid meat juice, dripping to the ground. Jiyu Xuanyuan's body was now far stronger than an ordinary person's body, but she still couldn't withstand the corrosion of this high-purity nuclear fuel rod. It was just that she didn't know how damaging this high-purity nuclear fuel rod was to Yuan Ku. The damage that nuclear weapons could do to Yuan Ku had always been a focus of human debate. According to historical records, at the beginning of the apocalypse, when their country was on the verge of extinction, North Korea was the first to use nuclear weapons. Later, other countries also used nuclear weapons, trying to use nuclear weapons to destroy Yuan Ku. However, after the nuclear weapons exploded, humans were surprised to find that even a large number of Yuan Ku, who was at the center of the explosion, survived and did not suffer any fatal injuries. When nuclear weapons, the last trump card of humans, lost their effect, the entire human government completely collapsed. Only the Chinese government, due to its ability to unite and the fact that the Sword Lady was the first to appear in China, finally protected the last human capital, Old Yangjing City, for a full 3 years. Until Old Yangjing City collapsed, Kanzu led the remaining people to hide in the dimensional rift. Therefore, humans had always thought that nuclear weapons had no lethality against Yuan Ku, and for a period of time, this was an irrefutable truth. However, after humans created high-purity nuclear fuel rods, they realized that the truth did not seem to be like this. The reason why nuclear weapons such as atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs had no effect on Yuan Ku was that the radiation emitted after their explosion was far inferior to the high-purity state. On the other hand, as long as the nuclear fuel rod's purity was high enough, it could still cause damage to Yuan-Ku. 95% was the limit that humans could achieve at present, but after experiments, it only had a little effect on the tiger-level Yuan-Ku. However, research showed that if the purity could be raised to 98%, it could also cause fatal damage to the dragon-level Yuan-Ku. If it was raised to 99%, it could cause damage to the meteor-level Yuan-Ku. If it was raised to 99.9%, it could cause damage to the eternal-level Yuan-Ku. In any case, if the concentration of nuclear fuel could be raised to 100%, then even the desolate-level Yuan-Ku would have the ability to kill it. However, this was only the inference of scientists from beginning to end, because no one had ever been able to raise the purity to more than 95%, so no one had ever been able to verify these conjectures. All along, the scientific research community had been arguing about the damage nuclear fuel could do to Yuan-Ku. The topic returned to Jiyu Shenyuan. After coming into contact with the high-purity nuclear fuel rod, a large amount of primal chaos qi entered Jiyu Xuanyuan's body through her rotten fingers, and the primordial purple qi in Jiyu Xuanyuan's body began to devour the primal chaos qi that seeped into Jiyu Xuanyuan's body even more frantically. Jiyu Shenyuan suddenly had an idea, and slowly moved the high-purity nuclear fuel rod closer to her heart, because this primordial qi was usually hidden in Jiyu Xuanyuan's heart. Jiyu Shenyuan really wanted to know what would happen if the primordial purple qi came into direct contact with the high-purity nuclear fuel rod. In the end, it turned out that Jiyu Shenyuan was courting death. When the high-purity nuclear fuel rod approached Jiyu Xuanyuan's chest, Jiyu Shenyuan immediately felt that her heart began to die, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a piece of charred mud, and her whole person was about to faint. Fortunately, Jiyu Shenyuan was prepared. When he was about to pass out, he bit the capsule with his sovereign blood in it and threw the high-purity nuclear fuel rod in his hand. Under the effect of the sovereign blood, the necrotic heart was repaired, and Jiyu Shenyuan very narrowly escaped with her life. After finding the high-purity nuclear fuel rod that Jiyu Shenyuan threw out, she found that about half of the high-purity nuclear fuel rod had disappeared. Immediately after, Jiyu Shenyuan found that the primordial purple qi in her body had disappeared without a trace again, and she no longer had the slightest interest in the primal chaos qi in Jiyu Xuanyuan's body. Jiyu Shenyuan immediately reacted. It should be that the primordial purple qi had devoured the half of the high-purity nuclear fuel rod that had lost, causing the primordial purple qi to be completely full, and no longer had any interest in the primal chaos qi that did not fill its stomach. After discovering this, Jiyu Shenyuan understood that she could not stay in this warehouse any longer. Otherwise, if the primal chaos qi in her body accumulated too much, it was very likely that it would cause unavoidable damage to her body. Jiyu Shenyuan did not want to waste too much of her precious sovereign blood on these things. Jiyu Shenyuan hurriedly found Kang Na, who was still gorging herself. Kang Na was indeed a giant dragon, and in just a few minutes, she had completely devoured half of the high-purity nuclear fuel rod in the warehouse. From the looks of it, it seemed like it would not be a big deal even if she ate all the nuclear fuel rods in this warehouse. Kang Na, are you full? Jiyu Shenyuan asked. Oh no. Kang Na's stomach is still very hungry. Kang Na said with a flushed face. You can eat in the future, otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. Jiyu Shenyuan completely ignored Kang Na's strong objections, and under Kang Na's reluctance, she led her out of the warehouse. As for those high-purity nuclear fuel rods that had been eaten, she would leave them to sword immortal Ling Shu to worry about. Chapter 1109. They are here. When the vast number of sword-bearers walked towards the outermost city wall under Jiyu Shenyuan's encouragement, everyone's blood was boiling. But when they stood on top of the city wall and saw the endless Yuan bandit army charging towards the city wall, fear once again took over their hearts. Some of the sword-bearers were so scared that their legs were trembling. Half of their lofty sentiments and lofty aspirations from before had also been lost. Everyone, hold on. In 3.5 hours, our super-dimensional wall system will be able to reactivate. As long as everyone can hold on for 3.5 hours, victory will be ours. Sword Immortal Ling Shu's passionate voice was transmitted to every sword-bearer's ears through their personal gadgets. What people feared the most was a cave with no end and a dark night with no dawn. They had to leave a sliver of hope so that they would have the desire to continue living. This time limit of 3.5 hours was every sword-bearer's hope to continue fighting. Even though they knew that more than half of the sword-bearers would die on the city wall after 3.5 hours. These humans still have some courage. Their turtle shells are gone, but they still dare to stand guard on the city wall. An ugly monster that looked like he had crawled out of hell gazed at the city wall in the distance. His name was Archimond, and he was a U-rank Yuan Ku from the Western Demon Beast faction. He was responsible for commanding all of the Western Demon Beast faction's forces attacking Yuzhang City. Archimond, never underestimate humans. This is my advice to you as a human. A general seated on a silver-white unicorn frowned at the ugly Archimond, wielding a great sword. He was the commander of the Martyr's Palace's forces attacking Yuzhang City. At the same time, he was also a U-rank Yuan Ku, one of the 10 kings of the Martyr's Palace. If it wasn't for the fact that we have to take down this damned city, I really don't want to see you again, Alexander. I'm not done with Arthas yet, Archimond said angrily. It was Arthas's choice to turn back into a human. He has already been redeemed. He is now a member of the Martyr's Palace. He is no longer your Lich King, Alexander said with a frown. Nonsense. If it weren't for our Burning Legion, Arthas would just be a useless human. He wouldn't have the ability to become a meteor master. Archimond and Alexander were about to start arguing over Arthas. Aya, do you want to drink some good wine to soothe your throats? A voluptuous, beautiful woman with a pair of watermelon-like oppies on her chest walked between Archimond and Alexander. She held a wine flask in her hand as she drunkenly asked the two of them. Archimond and Alexander gulped at the same time when they saw the pair of frighteningly large weapons on her chest. They couldn't help but turn their heads away to avoid being tempted by the pair of breasts. Aya, are you really not going to drink? The beautiful woman gulped down another mouthful of wine. Your Excellency Feathered Serpent God, please behave yourself. Look at the situation now. Don't forget about your sister. Alexander muttered. It turned out that this giant Opie that suddenly appeared was actually Feathered Serpent God, one of the famous Eon-level Yuan Ku of the Western Divine System. She was also the Yuan Ku who was responsible for leading the Western Divine System's army. If you mention my sister again, I will kill you. In the blink of an eye, Feathered Serpent God appeared behind Alexander. As her world-class oppies pressed against Alexander's back, her incomparably sharp dragon claws gripped Alexander's neck. Sorry. Alexander was a universe-level Yuan Ku, and Feathered Serpent God was an Eon-level Yuan Ku. Alexander was no match for Feathered Serpent God. Even though he was a king who had once unified half of the Eurasian continent, in front of Feathered Serpent God's powerful strength, he had no choice but to admit defeat. That's right. You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. Feathered Serpent God pushed Alexander away and gulped down another mouthful of wine. She said with some dissatisfaction, "Where are the people from the Fuso Divine System and the Heavenly Court? Why aren't they here yet?" Behind him, countless ugly monsters, orcs, undead, and all kinds of strange soldiers belonging to the Western Divine Beasts let out uniform howls. The entire ground seemed to tremble along with their howls. Behind Alexander was an endless phalanx of infantry. Each infantryman was holding a huge spear that was over 5 meters long. All the infantrymen were lined up in neat phalanxes. None of them spoke. They just stood still like statues. This was the Macedonian phalanx that Alexander the Great used to dominate the world. It was also the main force that the Martyr's Palace had sent to attack Yuzhang City. Of course, apart from the infantry, there were also many cavalry, light infantry, archers, and other types of soldiers. This was definitely one of the most powerful phalanxes of this era. As for the troops brought by Quetzalcoatl, they were much more chaotic and complicated. Among them were Aztec warriors with terrifying masks, paladins in golden armor, and even Saint Seiya in holy clothing. In addition, there were all kinds of monsters. However, compared to the terrifying monsters of the Western Divine Beasts, The monsters that feathered serpent god had brought should be called holy beasts. This was because these monsters were basically pure white, including unicorns and flower fairies that belonged to the Western divine system. They gave off an incomparably holy feeling. The troops that these three forces had brought together numbered more than 100,000. According to feathered serpent god, the troops of the Fuso divine system and the heavenly court had yet to appear. This meant that there were probably more than 150,000 troops attacking Yuzhang City. Without the protection of the super-dimensional defense system, this would definitely be a battle with a great disparity. What do you guys think? Should we wait for those two who are late, or should we attack now? Feathered serpent god asked Archimonde and Alexander. Of course we're going to attack. I can't wait to smell the burning blood. Archimonde's skin, which was like volcanic rocks, began to tremble. This was how Western divine beasts were. They were always eager to fight and kill. Without their turtle shells, these weak humans are far from being a match for the Macedonian warriors. Let's get rid of these humans, Alexander said. All right. Since that's the case, let's attack. Feathered serpent god concluded. The battle had just begun, but it had already fallen into an extremely tragic situation. The monsters of the Western divine beasts were the first to reach the city walls. They frantically used their bodies to attack the sturdy city walls that had been reinforced with dimensional alloys. The entire city walls trembled under their attacks. It was as if the entire world was about to collapse. Everyone, don't panic. Our city walls are very sturdy. These divine beasts can't break through them. Let them do it themselves. Now, everyone, release your sword maidens and prepare to receive the attacks from the sky. Sword Immortal Ling Shu's voice sounded in the ears of all the divine beasts. Sword Immortal Ling Shu was right. The first attacks to reach the city walls were indeed attacks from the sky. Regardless of whether it was the ferocious demon-winged birds, the simple and honest two-legged flying dragons, or the holy and pure divine sky falcons, these flying divine beasts that belonged to different factions of Yuan Ku were all mixed together at this moment. They launched a series of surprise attacks against the human divine beasts on the city walls. Open the entrance to the safety wall immediately. All divine beasts, enter the safety wall immediately. Sword maidens, stay on the city walls and prepare for battle. At Sword Immortal Ling Shu's command, circular entrances would open every few hundred meters or so on the city walls. All the divine beasts would immediately enter these entrances. When all the divine beasts had entered, these entrances would immediately close again. Only a few ventilation holes were left open. This was the biggest difference between the defensive battles of the city walls after the Great Calamity and the traditional defensive battles of the city walls before the Great Calamity. Once the dimensional barrier system was breached, all the divine beasts would immediately hide behind the safety wall. This way, their bodies would be protected by the safety wall, and they wouldn't be directly attacked by Yuan Ku. The ones who were actually fighting were the sword maidens who were controlled by the divine beasts outside. All spirit sword maidens immediately take to the sky and use area of effect skills to strangle the sky. Under Sword Immortal Ling Shu's command, all the spirit sword maidens flew into the sky together and used their area of effect skills to form a blanket of area of effect attacks. Most of the Yuan Ku in the sky were rat, tiger, dragon, and dragon tier Yuan Ku. Most of them died to the attacks of the spirit sword maidens in a few moves. However, there were still too few spirit sword tier divine beasts in Yuzhang City. There was no way they could protect most of the airspace above the city walls. Thus, a large number of flying Yuan Ku began to attack the low-level divine beasts. On the other hand, the low-level sword mistresses were having a hard time dealing with the flying bandits. It was difficult for their attacks to land on the agile flying bandits. Most of their attacks were in vain. In just 3 to 4 minutes, a sword mistress's shield had been shattered by the concentrated attacks of the bandits. She was grabbed by the neck by a celestial eagle and thrown into the midst of the Western magical beasts' army below the city wall. In just a few seconds, the bandits had smashed her into pieces. Whoa! Within the safety wall, the divine sword maiden spat out a large mouthful of blood. This meant that her sword scar had been completely broken. Her divine sword maiden was also done for. Comrades, pay attention. Once you find that your divine sword maiden's shields are running out of energy, immediately order them to return to their swords. Don't stay outside and fight with these Yuan Ku. Seeing the first divine sword maiden to be broken, Sword Immortal Ling Shu couldn't help but grit his teeth and said to the other divine sword maidens. The safety wall was a wall that was specially opened on the city walls. It was used for the divine sword maidens whose shields had run out of energy to hide and recover their sword essence. At the same time, there were also some equipment that could help recover sword essence, as well as public medical pods that specialized in treating divine sword maidens. There were also divine swordsmiths that could repair the divine sword maidens that hadn't been completely broken. However, the flying Yuan Ku was actually not that much of a problem. The flying Yuan Ku's attack power wasn't high, and it didn't last long. In the short term, the actual threat to the divine sword maidens was not high. The real threat to the divine sword maidens was the Yuan Ku that climbed up the city walls. Once these Yuan Ku reached the top of the city walls, they would immediately pose a fatal threat to the divine sword maidens. At this time, a Saint Seiya in silver-white armor had unknowingly climbed up the city walls and entered the divine sword maidens. Chapter 11:10. The battle was going on in a tragic way. Since the dimensional wall had lost its protection, the battle finally took place on the city wall. Tens of thousands of sword maidens and Yuan Ku fought fiercely on the city wall that was more than 200 kilometers long. In the beginning, the sword maidens still had the advantage of numbers on the city wall. They killed a large number of Yuan Ku. However, as more and more Yuan Ku climbed onto the city wall, the sword maidens were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Often, one sword maiden had to face the siege of 2 Yuan Ku. 10 minutes after the battle began, a large number of casualties began to appear. Groups of sword maidens' personal shields were destroyed by Yuan Ku, but their sword maidens could not order them to return to their swords because they were fighting with Yuan Ku. When they were in contact with Yuan Ku, it was impossible to order them to return to their swords. There were only 2 ways to deal with this situation. One was to order the sword mistress to fully disengage from Yuenko. Then, the sword wielder would immediately issue the order to return the sword mistress to the sword wielder's hand through a specially created vent in the safety wall. This would allow the sword mistress to return to the sword wielder's hand and reset her personal shield. This was also the method that the sword maidens used in most situations. However, it was inevitable that they would encounter Yuan Ku who were particularly annoying. Those Yuan Ku would entangle the sword maidens of the sword maidens, making it impossible for the sword maidens to break away from them. In such a situation, the sword maidens had to take the risk themselves. In order to protect their sword maidens from being broken by Yuan Ku, the sword maidens had to take the risk to rush out of the wall and rush to their sword maiden's side. They had to use their bodies to grab the sword maidens and force them to return to their swords. Then, they would rush back to the wall through the nearest safe entrance. During this period, the sword maidens could only use their personal shields to resist the damage from the surrounding Yuan Ku. If they could resist the damage from Yuan Ku, they would be able to return to the wall with their sword maidens. However, if the swordsman did not manage to block Yuan Ku's attacks and lost the protection of his personal shield, he would most likely die on the safety wall. For example, there was an ancient sword wielder below Sword Immortal Ling Shu. His sword maiden's personal shield had already been shattered, but she was being held back by a slime. The slime stuck to the sword maiden's body like plasticine. Beside the slime was a kobold who continuously swung his great axe at the sword maiden's body. The sword maiden's durability was rapidly decreasing. If she could not return to the safety wall soon, the sword maiden would be broken into 2. At that moment, an exit appeared on the wall closest to the sword maiden. The wielder of the sword maiden sprinted towards the sword maiden at the fastest speed he could muster. Along the way, he used his personal shield to resist many attacks. Finally, he got close to the sword maiden. He placed his left hand on the sword maiden's shoulder, and the sword maiden instantly transformed back into a sword. Only then did he escape from the slime's entanglement. However, even though the wielder tried his best to escape back to the safety wall, he was only an ancient sword wielder, and a young one at that. He did not have much sword essence, and his personal shield could not withstand the attacks of the other Yuan Ku. Finally, when he was about 10 meters away from the entrance of the safety wall, he was simultaneously pressed to the ground by 2 Yuan Kus, and his personal shield was shattered. Shui Lan, you must live well and wait for your next master. The swordsman knew he couldn't escape. At the last moment of his life, he used all his strength to throw the swordswoman into the entrance of the safety wall. In the next second, his body was torn in half by the 2 bandits, and he died on the wall with his flesh and blood smeared all over. This was not an isolated case on the battlefield. Almost every minute, there were 3 or 4 wielder who died while trying to save their sword maidens. Even if they were lucky enough to save their sword maidens, this was only one reincarnation. Once the sword maiden reforged her personal shield on the wall, the sword maiden would have to fight her way out of the wall to fight Yuenko again. Once the energy of the personal shield was depleted, she would have to repeat the process of being rescued by her sword wielder. One should not think that hiding behind the safety wall was safe. The protection of the safety wall was only for those below the dragon rank, Yuan Ku. If a dragon rank or above Yuan Ku stepped onto the safety wall, then this Yuan Ku could completely destroy the outer walls of the safety wall. In this way, all the wielder and swordsmen within the safety wall would be caught like turtles in a jar, and the safety wall would become a wall of death for them. Sword Immortal Ling Shu did not hide behind the safety wall. He continued to hover in the air, relying on the strength of his personal shield. He used his Wangshu sword to fight on the city wall, while using his spirit sword maidens to fight the flying Yuan Kus in the air. However, Sword Immortal Ling Shu's swordsmanship was very bad. He only knew some basic swordsmanship movements. However, because Sword Immortal Ling Shu was fast enough, his attacks were strong enough, and his personal shield had enough energy, no matter how bad his swordsmanship was, the flying Yuan Kus were not a match for a single attack from Sword Immortal Ling Shu. They all died to Sword Immortal Ling Shu's sword. However, Sword Immortal Ling Shu was still a layman in swordsmanship. Against these flying Yuan Kus, he was not even as fast as a famed sword rank sword maiden. However, it was still better than nothing. While fighting, Sword Immortal Ling Shu was also constantly paying attention to the situation on the city wall that the highest artificial intelligence had collected. 15 minutes had passed since the beginning of the battle. A conservative estimate was that over 1,000 artificial sword maidens had been destroyed, and over 100 sword bearers had died on the city wall. If this continues, we might be able to hold on for 3.5 hours. Sword Immortal Ling Shu estimated the rate of casualties and thought optimistically. Unfortunately, Sword Immortal Ling Shu's optimism soon faded. This was because a domineering figure in silver armor suddenly appeared on the city wall. With a light wave of the spear in his hand, the shields of the dozens of sword maidens around him were all shattered in an instant. Their bodies were reduced to ashes, leaving only a pile of broken swords on the city wall. With just the power of a single spear, these sword maidens were all destroyed. They didn't even have the slightest ability to resist. It's U-level Yuan Ku, Alexander the Great. Sword Immortal Ling Shu's pupils contracted as he recognized this silver-armored Yuan Ku. Sword Immortal Ling Shu knew very well that he couldn't allow this U-level Yuan Ku to continue killing as he pleased on the city wall. Otherwise, most of the sword maidens would be destroyed by his hands. Wangshu Sword Maiden, I'm counting on you. Sword Immortal Ling Shu had no choice but to immediately summon the Wangshu Sword Goddess, who was on the other side, to teleport to Alessandra's side. Right now, only the Wangshu Sword Goddess, who was also an immortal sword maiden, could battle Alessandra. Although the Wangshu Sword Lady was able to quickly tie down Alessandra, preventing him from attacking the other weaker sword ladies, the Wangshu Sword Lady soon showed signs of fatigue under Alessandra's attacks. In just 2 to 3 minutes, she was completely suppressed, and the power of her personal barrier began to plummet rapidly. Damn it, I've expended too much energy fighting that giant dragon just now. The Wangshu Sword Maiden is no longer a match for this U-level Yuan Ku. Sword Immortal Ling Shu said through gritted teeth. In order to defeat Kang Na, Sword Immortal Ling Shu had already expended all of his reserves. This wasn't just a simple depletion of sword essence. Instead, he had also expended the essence within his body. This kind of loss couldn't be recovered without a month or two. Thus, the Wangshu sword maiden was naturally at a disadvantage. If she continued to fight Alexander like this, the Wangshu sword maiden would lose sooner or later. Sword immortal Ling Shu was so worried about this that he didn't even notice the faint ripples in the air around him. Archerons easily arrived at Sword immortal Ling Shu's side. Sword immortal Ling Shu didn't even have time to react before he was struck by Archeron's finger of death. Sword immortal Ling Shu's entire body was instantly sent flying, crashing heavily into the city wall. The energy of the protective shield around him was instantly depleted by about 10%. The finger of death was one of Archeron's most famous techniques. The effect of this technique was very simple and violent. In an instant, it dealt a massive amount of burning damage to his opponent. What was even more terrifying was that this technique couldn't be dodged. The only shortcoming was that it had a relatively short casting range. Archerons had to be within 100 meters of his opponent before he could use this technique. If it wasn't for the fact that Sword immortal Ling Shu was distracted and didn't have time to hide in the void, Archeron's finger of death wouldn't have struck him so easily. Oh no! In the instant that he was struck by the finger of death, Sword immortal Ling Shu understood that he was already in an extremely terrible situation. This was because the finger of death also had an extremely terrifying effect. That was, it could temporarily seal the ability of the target to hide in the void. This also meant that after being struck by the finger of death, Sword immortal Ling Shu wouldn't be able to hide in the void for a short period of time to avoid Archeron's continued attacks. With Sword immortal Ling Shu's shoddy swordsmanship, how could he possibly avoid Archeron's entanglement? Archeron's finger of death had depleted 10% of the energy of Sword immortal Ling Shu's shields. In a situation where he couldn't hide in the void, Sword immortal Ling Shu even doubted whether he could last more than 10 minutes under Archeron's direct attacks. At this time, Sword immortal Ling Shu's best response was to escape. As long as Sword immortal Ling Shu could escape into the dimensional wall of the core area, he could borrow the protection of the dimensional wall of the core area to prevent Archerons from attacking him. He could also wait until the effects of the finger of death wore off to hide in the void and continue to command the Wangshu sword in battle. However, Sword immortal Ling Shu was also very clear that if he really hid in the core area, then Archerons, who had lost the control of the immortal sword tier swordsman, would unhesitatingly attack the sword ladies on the city wall. The safety wall wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow from Archerons, a Yun-level swordsman like Yuan Ku. At that time, there would definitely be a large number of sword ladies and swordsman casualties. This would undoubtedly be a devastating blow to the swordsman fighting on the city wall of Yuzhang City. Forget it. I'll just leave these old bones here. Just as Sword immortal Ling Shu was preparing to fight to the death with Archerons, a sword chi that Sword immortal Ling Shu was extremely familiar with descended from the sky. Archerons had made the same mistake as Sword immortal Ling Shu just now. All his attention was focused on Sword immortal Ling Shu, and he didn't even notice that a sharp sword chi had shot out from above his head. This distraction was a fatal blow to Archerons. The sword chi easily chopped off Archeron's arm, and the sky was filled with red magma-like blood that sprayed out. In the blink of an eye, Archerons had become a cripple. Chapter 11:11. Who is it? Archerons, whose arm was cut off by the sword chi, let out a heart-wrenching roar, but before his voice fell, another 5 similar sword chi slashed toward his body. Do you think you can still hurt me now? Archeron's palm pushed forward, and a blood-red shield blocked in front of him. This shield firmly blocked Archeron's front, and these sword chi simply couldn't hurt Archeron's body again. However, there was a prerequisite, and that was that the sword chi had to hit him from the front. What Archerons never expected was that the sword chi that was about to hit the shield suddenly made a turn and directly bypassed the shield that Archerons put up. With lightning speed, it slashed Archeron's body from behind, directly twisting Archeron's back into a bloody mess. Ah! Ah! Archerons was so angry that he fell into a state of frenzy. However, these 2 sword chi also allowed him to confirm the source of the attack. It was a human woman who was floating in the air with a long sword in her hand. It's actually a spirit sword level sword wielder. In the battle between humans and Yuan-Ku for more than 1,000 years, a Yuan-Ku at Archranz's level could determine the level of the other party's sword wielder just by smelling it. Therefore, when Archranz found out that the other party was only a spirit sword wielder, he became even more angry. He, the dignified universe-level Yuan-Ku, actually had one of his arms cut off by a spirit sword wielder who was one level lower than him, and his body was even twisted into a bloody mess. For the proud Archranz, this was more than just a great shame and humiliation. Archranz, who was blinded by anger, seemed to have forgotten the fact that he was a mage. His whole body directly entered the void, and in the next second, he appeared behind the woman, ready to use his magma-like fist to blow this damn woman into a pile of meat sauce. Stupid. Jiyu Shenyuan, who was initially worried that Archranz would hide in the void and attack him, realized that the other party had actually lost his mind and wanted to engage in close combat with him, was simply overjoyed. The human's information clearly stated that Archimond was a powerful universe-state mage, Yuan-Ku. He was a dual elemental mage of darkness and destruction, and his long-range attacks were unparalleled. He could even stand shoulder to shoulder with some universe-state Yuan-Ku. However, the general rule of every world was that the physical strength of a mage was far from being comparable to the strength of their spells. Even the most powerful mage would find it hard to escape the fate of being killed by a warrior in close combat. Now that Archranz had lost his mind, he was so eager for revenge that he actually rushed in front of Jiyu Shenyuan, wanting to play hand-to-hand combat with Jiyu Shenyuan. How could Jiyu Shenyuan not be overjoyed? As a result, in the next few minutes, Archranz suffered the most miserable battle of his life. He originally wanted to use his fists to deal with the opponent, but he was stunned to find that he couldn't even touch the opponent's body, but the opponent could attack him from all kinds of angles and all kinds of strange positions. What made Archranz especially frightened was that the sword in the opponent's hand didn't seem like a spirit sword wielder at all. Archranz's skin made of magma was so fragile in front of this sword that it couldn't withstand a single blow. This sword could easily pierce his body, taking away a large amount of his blood and magic. Archranz had only seen such a terrifying defense-breaking ability on some peak immortal sword maidens, or emperor sword maidens. Archranz, who was aware of this situation, was anxious to get out of this terrible situation, and also wanted to use some instantaneous spells to take away the opponent's life, but the opponent seemed to be able to predict all of his actions. Every time Archranz was about to release a spell, the opponent's sword would be able to perfectly attack the position of his demon core, forcing Archranz to have no choice but to urgently move his demon core. However, in this way, the spell that Archranz wanted to cast was also interrupted by the opponent. Sword Immortal Ling Shu looked at the battle in the sky with incomparable amazement. The powerful universe-rank Yuan-Ku was like a childish baby in front of the spirit sword wielder Jiyu Shenyuan, who was wantonly abused by Jiyu Shenyuan. A large amount of Archranz's flesh and blood was knocked down from the sky by Jiyu Shenyuan. These pieces of flesh and blood were fine when they landed on the city wall made of dimensional alloy, but once they landed on an ordinary house, they could instantly corrode a large hole in the house, emitting thick blood-red smoke. From this, it could be seen that even a piece of Archranz's flesh and blood that was knocked off had a powerful corrosive effect. Fortunately, Sword Immortal Ling Shu had seen the battle between Jiyu Shenyuan and Kang Na before. Otherwise, Sword Immortal Ling Shu wouldn't be incomparably amazed right now, but dumbfounded. At the same time, the reporters hiding behind the safety wall discovered this thrilling battle. They immediately pointed the cameras in their hands at the sky, and the civilians who were paying attention to every movement on the battlefield in the underground shelter also saw Jiyu Xuanyuan's heroic and invincible figure. Rip! Another large piece of flesh and blood was cut off by Jiyu Xuanyuan's sword. Although Archranz's powerful recovery ability allowed these severed pieces of flesh to grow back in an instant, this consumption came from the power in Archranz's demon core. Once all the magic in the demon core disappeared, Archranz would only have a dead end and return to the dimensional vortex. Damn it! I've already consumed 20% of my magic power in such a short period of time. Amidst his anger, Archranz looked at the magic power in his demon core and was horrified to find that 20% of his magic power had already been consumed in the battle just now. Such a huge loss made Archranz sober up from his anger a lot, and then he scolded himself fiercely in his heart, I'm really an idiot, why did I have to fight hand-to-hand with this spirit sword-level swordsman? Arkherons finally discovered his own foolishness, so he immediately made a change. In the blink of an eye, he slashed open the void and drilled in, disappearing without a trace. At this time, Arkherons clearly knew where his advantage was, and also knew even more clearly where the biggest shortcoming of a spirit sword-level swordsman was. Not long after Arkherons fled into the void, a finger of death shot out from Jiyu Xuanyuan's left rear without any warning. At the critical moment, Jiyu Shenyuan hurriedly used the move 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven, Sword of the Spring, forcibly blocking this death energy with sword chi. But this was just the beginning. In the next second, a total of 32 fireballs broke through the void from all directions, uniformly rolling toward Jiyu Shenyuan. However, because the speed of these fireballs was far slower than the speed of the Finger of Death, Jiyu Shenyuan was still able to easily avoid these 32 fireballs. But the trouble with this spell was not the fireball itself, but the path that the fireball passed through. Wherever these fireballs passed through the air, it began to burn. Even though there was no medium for the flames, they just burned in the air. This is Arkherons' fire of destruction. Jiyu Shenyuan recalled the information about Arkherons in his mind, and knew that this was one of the unique skills that made Arkherons famous. These fireballs had an extremely magical power. Wherever they passed through, whether it was the ground or the air, it would all burn. And once they came into contact with these burning flames, they would immediately attach to the enemy's body, using the enemy's flesh and blood as a medium to burn. And these flames burned for an extremely long time. Even if there was no medium in the air, they could still burn for at least 20 minutes. What was even more troublesome was that these fireballs could endlessly roll in the air. These fireballs were like paintbrushes, and the sky was their canvas. These paintbrushes would slowly fill up the empty space on the canvas, so that in the end, the entire sky would be filled with raging flames. At that time, unless Jiyu Shenyuan escaped far away from Yuzhang City, she would have nowhere to hide from these flames. 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven, Waterfall Golden Chrysanthemum. Jiyu Shenyuan of course knew the consequences of letting these fireballs roll continuously. So she slashed out with the Waterfall Golden Chrysanthemum without hesitation. Under the attack of the Waterfall Golden Chrysanthemum's huge sword aura, these fireballs were instantly torn apart and dissipated in the air. But before Jiyu Shenyuan had time to breathe a sigh of relief, another 32 fireballs rolled out of the void, continuing to fill up the empty space that had not been filled before. I have to enter the void and kill Arkherons, otherwise those sword women on the city wall will be in trouble. Jiyu Shenyuan was not afraid of these flames, but she knew that once those sword women who were fighting on the city wall encountered these flames, it would be a terrible situation. But just destroying these fireballs would have no effect. With Arkherons' power, he could continuously summon these fireballs. At that time, even if Jiyu Xuanyuan's sword aura was exhausted, she would not be able to consume Arkherons' magic power. After all, Arkherons was a veteran U-level Yuan Ku. Purely comparing magic power and sword aura, Arkherons' magic power was far greater than Jiyu Xuanyuan's sword aura. Right now, there was only one way to stop Arkherons, and that was to find a way to bully Arkherons' side like before, so that Jiyu Shenyuan could forcibly interrupt Arkherons' casting. But this time, Arkherons learned to be smart. He hid in the void and refused to show his face. This made Jiyu Shenyuan unable to attack Arkherons even if she had a whole body of sword aura. At this moment, Jiyu Shenyuan once again felt the powerlessness of a spirit sword-level sword wielder. She, who could not enter the void, had no way to completely kill U-level Yuan Ku. But Jiyu Shenyuan had to enter the void, otherwise the whole situation would be incomparably bad. Just as Jiyu Shenyuan was feeling anxious about this, the figure of sword immortal Ling Shu came into Jiyu Xuanyuan's sight. How could I forget this guy? A trace of a smile appeared on Jiyu Xuanyuan's lips. It seemed that Arkherons' good days were over. Chapter 11-12. As a spirit sword wielder, Jiyu Shenyuan's biggest shortcoming was that she couldn't enter the void. This was also why no matter how powerful Jiyu Shenyuan was, she would still be suppressed by U-level Yuan Ku or immortal sword wielder. There were 2 ways to solve this shortcoming. 1. Jiyu Shen Yuan could become an immortal sword wielder. This way, she would naturally have the power to enter the void, and those level Yuan Ku would completely lose their support. 2. Jiyu Shen Yuan also had the power to enter the void through other means. All in all, Jiyu Shen Yuan had to find a way to enter the void. This was the fundamental solution to all problems. And now, the solution to the problem had arrived. A second ago, Sword Immortal Ling Shu was still worrying about how Jiyu Shen Yuan would deal with Arc-Herons, who was hiding in the void. In the next second, Jiyu Shen Yuan appeared on Sword Immortal Ling Shu's body and quickly said to Sword Immortal Ling Shu, "Senior Ling Shu, I hope you can help me. As long as I can help you, just say it." Sword Immortal Ling Shu answered very quickly, without any hesitation. "It's very simple. I just need you to help me enter the void." This was Jiyu Shen Yuan's solution. Since Jiyu Shen Yuan couldn't enter the void, then she just had to find someone who could take her into the void. At this time, there was only one immortal sword wielder in Yuzhang City. Jiyu Shen Yuan couldn't find anyone else to help her other than Sword Immortal Ling Shu. Of course, that's not a problem. Sword Immortal Ling Shu nodded at first, but soon revealed a troubled expression. "The void has its own rules. Once I bring a power that isn't recognized by the void into the void, then I will naturally be rejected by the void. My movement speed in the void will definitely be greatly reduced. In this way, it will be very difficult to catch up to Arc-Herons in the void. At that time, I'm afraid it will be a waste of effort." Sword Immortal Ling Shu's worry was not unreasonable. The reason why level Yuan Ku and Immortal Sword Wielder could freely travel through the void was that their power was recognized by the void. However, once they entered the void with a life form that had not been acknowledged by the void, they would be rejected by the void. The sword wielder would have to divert a large amount of energy to resist the rejection of the void. This was also why it was so troublesome to save someone through the void hand. This was not a big deal when they were not in combat mode. Immortal sword wielders could use all their strength to resist the rejection of the void. However, once they were in combat mode, they would have to use more strength to fight. As a result, dealing with the rejection of the void became a very difficult task. It was even possible that the opponent hiding in the void would take the opportunity to attack him. At that time, he would have to deal with the two forces of Yuan Ku and the rejection of the void at the same time, which would undoubtedly put his life in great danger. "Don't worry. As long as I can enter the void, Arc-Herons is dead for sure." Jiyu Shenyuan took a deep look at the 32 fireballs that were constantly rolling in the sky and said with absolute certainty, "In that case, let's go." Sword Immortal Ling Shu also tore open the void. Jiyu Shenyuan smiled slightly, and the two of them walked into the void together. At this moment, the sword wielders inside the safety wall and the audience watching the live broadcast were all extremely nervous as they stared at the place where Jiyu Shenyuan and Sword Immortal Ling Shu disappeared. According to the host's explanation, they already knew that Jiyu Shenyuan and Sword Immortal Ling Shu had already entered the void to pursue Arc-Herons. This concerned their own lives. If Jiyu Shenyuan won, then the army of Yuan Ku, who had lost a universe-level Yuan Ku, would definitely fall into chaos, and the hope of holding on would greatly increase. However, if Jiyu Shenyuan lost, then humanity would completely lose the power to resist the universe-level Yuan Ku, and the entire defense line would collapse in an instant. Although everyone was eager to know the situation of the battle in the void, they had no way of knowing exactly what was going on in the void. However, the cameraman had the foresight to point the camera at the rolling fireballs in the sky. Many of the audience immediately understood the cameraman's intention. If Jiyu Shenyuan won in the void, then these fireballs would definitely dissipate. However, if Jiyu Shenyuan lost in the void, only less than a minute had passed, but in the hearts of everyone in the audience, it felt as long as a year. As they waited anxiously, the fireballs finally changed. The fireballs that were rolling like wheels a moment ago stood still in an instant. Then, they began to bounce up and down like bouncing balls. Finally, these fireballs leaped to an extremely high altitude and exploded like brilliant fireworks. After the final brilliance, they disappeared without a trace. Did we win? Everyone who saw this scene nervously asked the people around them, but no one could give an accurate answer. Although according to speculation, the destruction of these fireballs also meant that Arkherons had lost, this was only speculation. No one could be sure of the situation in the void. Just as everyone was speculating, there was finally movement in the void. A void door was sliced open, and Jiyu Shenyuan walked out from the void door like a fairy. Her posture was perfect like a goddess. Behind Jiyu Shenyuan was Sword Immortal Ling Shu, whose face was completely blank. Rather than saying that Sword Immortal Ling Shu was an immortal sword wielder at this time, he was more like a child with dementia. Miss Jiyu Shenyuan, did we win? One of the sword wielder with the loudest voice asked Jiyu Shenyuan impatiently. Jiyu Shenyuan didn't answer his question. Instead, she looked at the Yuan Ku on the city wall, who were in different states of mind. Among them, the ugliest, the cruelest, and the craziest Yuan Ku from the Western Beast Camp began to panic. Except for a small portion of Yuan Ku who were still fighting with the sword ladies, the rest of the Yuan Ku from the Western Beast Camp seemed to have lost their leader. They began to scatter everywhere, and some even began to attack the other Yuan Ku around them. And the majority of the Yuan Ku from the Western Beast Camp began to retreat out of Yuzhang City. They fled with all their might in the direction they had come from, as if there was an extremely terrifying enemy here. Arkherons is dead. All the sword wielder and the spectators looked at each other, unable to believe their eyes. There was only one explanation for the Yuan bandit army of the Western Magical Beast Camp to be in such a state. Their leader had died. After losing their leader, the Yuan Ku returned to their individual existence. The instincts that had been suppressed by their leader began to erupt. They began to attack the Yuan Ku from the opposing camp and began to kill each other. And most of the Yuan Ku from the Western Beast Camp felt the fear that erupted when their leader died. It was because of this fear that they chose to escape from the battlefield in Yuzhang City. From this point, it could be seen that Arkherons was indeed dead. He was indeed dead. Long live. After confirming this, all the sword wielder burst into wild cheers. Jiyu Xuanyuan's battle was equivalent to destroying 1/3 of Yuan Ku's power. Arkherons is dead. Alexander the Great, who had the absolute advantage in the battle against the Wangshu sword, immediately discovered the fact that Arkherons was dead before the Yuan Ku from the Western Beast Camp could retreat. At the same time, he felt that the void around Yuzhang City was suddenly in an extremely chaotic state, as if a huge hand was stirring up the entire void. As a cautious person, he immediately felt extreme fear. If Arkherons, who was also a universe-level bandit, could be killed in the void, then wouldn't he suffer the same fate? Thinking of this, Alexander could no longer stay calm and fight against the Wangshu sword on the city wall. He immediately used an ultimate move to force the Wangshu sword to retreat. Then, he gave up the absolute advantage that he had painstakingly built up. He didn't even dare to enter the void. He directly jumped off the city wall and returned to his army. Only then did he barely feel a trace of security. At this time, the feathered serpent god also appeared beside Alexander. This universe-level Yuan Ku naturally also sensed Arkheron's death. This also deeply shocked her. She put away the wine flask that never left her hand, and hurriedly asked Alexander what happened to Arkherons. However, Alexander couldn't say why. He could only tell the feathered serpent god that he was fighting with the immortal sword-level sword mistress Wangshu sword. Arkherons went to chase after the Wangshu sword's sword wielder, but he was later blocked by a human spirit sword-level sword wielder. A huge battle broke out between the two sides. In the end, Arkherons suffered a great loss in the hands of the spirit sword-level sword mistress, so the two sides moved the battlefield to the void. Alexander didn't know the rest. He only knew that Arkherons died in the void. "I'll enter the void to take a look." The feathered serpent god immediately entered the void, trying to find some clues. However, she quickly retreated from the void with a head full of fog. "The void is very chaotic now," the feathered serpent god said worriedly. "The void is chaotic like a whirlpool. I'm afraid we won't be able to find any other clues. But this chaos is the biggest clue." Alexander immediately said, "The void is empty and stable. Even we can't form a vortex in the void. The only way is to understand the laws of the void and then destroy the laws of the void. That way, there's a possibility of causing chaos in the void. It's very likely that an existence that can destroy the void did it and caused Arc Herons to die in the void. An existence that can destroy the void. The feathered serpent god was shocked. The pair of huge oppies on her chest began to shake up and down like a basketball. Don't scare me. I've never heard of a third human Gendi. Chapter 11:13. Even a universe-level Yuan Ku like Feathered Serpent God could not disturb the rules of the void. This required an extremely strong understanding of the rules of the void. At the same time, one had to be able to control an extremely strong power to do so. In theory, as long as these two conditions were met, even an ancient sword wielder could disturb the rules of the void. However, since ancient times, only primordial level Yuan Ku and Emperor Sword Wielder could satisfy the criteria of disturbing the rules of the void. Apart from them, no other level could do this. Therefore, the Feathered Serpent God immediately began to suspect that a human Emperor Sword Wielder had killed Archimonde in the void. That's strange. According to the information from above, wasn't there a flood-level dragon fighting Yuzhang City? This time, the Yuan shield was also destroyed by this flood-level dragon. Where is she now? Why is there no trace of her? Feathered Serpent God suddenly thought of this. Could it be that an Emperor Sword Wielder? Very likely. Alessander nodded solemnly. At the same time, he shrank his body back. One could imagine the fear in his heart. Although Alessander had seen Archimonde and that spirit sword level swordsman enter the void, Alessander didn't believe that it was that spirit sword level swordsman who killed Archimonde in the void. He was more willing to believe that there was a human sword emperor hiding near Yuzhang City, ready to kill them at any time. Let's be careful. Don't fail to conquer Yuzhang City and end up dying here. That idiot Loki is the best lesson, Feathered Serpent God immediately said to Alessander. Quetzalcoatl immediately said to Alessander. The Western Pantheon and the Martyr's Palace had always had a good relationship. However, the Western Pantheon and the Western magical beasts were complete enemies. If it weren't for the sake of conquering Yuzhang City, these two forces wouldn't have worked together. That's right. Be careful. Alessander agreed. With this guess, Alessander and Feathered Serpent God became extremely careful. They did not dare to charge forward anymore. They could only order their subordinates to keep going forward. They wanted to force out the mysterious person who had killed Arc Herons. Yuan Kus were most afraid of Emperor Sword Wielder, but they were even more afraid of the Emperor Sword Wielder hiding in the dark. It seems like those universe-class Yuan Ku won't make a move for a while. Seeing Alexander and Feathered Serpent God, the two top Yuanko experts retreat, Jiyu Xuanyuan's face finally revealed a hint of a smile. Yeah. Until now, I still don't believe that a spirit sword level sword wielder could actually stir the rules of the entire void and directly use the power of the void to kill Archimonde in the void. Sword Immortal Ling Shu spoke with a fearful expression. Even now, he was still recalling the battle that he had just experienced. At that time, after he and Jiyu Shenyuan entered the void, the two of them saw Arc Herons constantly releasing fireballs into the outside world. I'll take you to kill him right now. Just as Sword Immortal Ling Shu was about to bring Jiyu Shenyuan closer to Arc Herons, Jiyu Shenyuan suddenly pressed down on Sword Immortal Ling Shu's shoulder and said, Lord Ling Shu, I have another favor that I hope you can help me with. Say it. Since I've already brought you into the void, there's nothing I can't help you with. Sword Immortal Ling Shu nodded. I need to guide a supreme sword technique. This will take 3 minutes. I hope that Sword Immortal Ling Shu can think of a way to delay Arc Herons for 3 minutes so that I have time to release my sword technique, Jiyu Shenyuan said faintly. Hearing Jiyu Xuanyuan's words, Sword Immortal Ling Shu's mentality collapsed. Miss Shenyuan, please don't joke around. Arc Herons is a veteran universe-class Yuan Ku. Unless His Majesty Gendi uses a powerful move, it's impossible to directly kill Arc Herons, Sword Immortal Ling Shu said with a bitter expression. Sword Immortal Ling Shu spoke with a wry expression. He felt like Jiyu Shenyuan had gone mad. Otherwise, she wouldn't say something like this to kill Arc Herons. Trust me. I never lie. Jiyu Shenyuan didn't directly answer Sword Immortal Ling Shu's question. Instead, her gaze was resolute as she continued to speak to Sword Immortal Ling Shu. All right. Even if the power of your powerful move can kill Arc Herons, this is the void. As soon as he notices anything amiss, he'll immediately escape from the void. No matter how powerful your powerful move is, it's useless if it can't hit Arc Herons. Sword Immortal Ling Shu continued to persuade her patiently. Trust me. Jiyu Shenyuan still said these 3 words. All right. I'll only help you delay for 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, I'll immediately take you away from the void. Sword Immortal Ling Shu finally agreed to Jiyu Xuanyuan's request helplessly. Then, he charged toward Arc Herons on the other side of the void. Arc Herons was instantly given a fright when he saw a sword wielder flying toward him. He thought that it was that woman with terrifying close combat abilities who had come to make trouble for him. Arc Herons was just about to escape from the void when he realized that it wasn't that woman who was charging toward him. It was the male immortal sword rank sword wielder who had been beaten to a pulp by him earlier. He was like a punching bag. Damn it. Faced with such a punching bag opponent, if Arc Herons tried to escape, he wouldn't have the face to continue living in this world. Thus, Arc Herons unceremoniously charged forward and directly tapped a finger of death on Sword Immortal Ling Shu's body. Sword Immortal Ling Shu knew that he was no match for Arc Herons no matter what. Thus, he simply adopted the mentality of not retaliating when hit, not retaliating when scolded, and focused on defending himself. He relied on the sufficient energy of his close combat shield to forcefully withstand Archeron's attacks. Fortunately, Archeron's most powerful move, the Finger of Death, had a 2-minute cooldown. Otherwise, Sword Immortal Ling Shu would really be unable to withstand 10% of the close combat shield's energy. Arc Herons attacked Sword Immortal Ling Shu like a madman while cautiously and vigilantly observing his surroundings. Even an idiot could tell that there was something very wrong with Sword Immortal Ling Shu, who had rushed over to act as a punching bag. There must be some kind of trap waiting for him in the surroundings. But after observing for a long time, Arc Herons still didn't discover any signs of that terrifying female swordsman appearing next to him. 2 minutes and 30 seconds, 2 minutes and 40 seconds, 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Sword Immortal Ling Shu anxiously sensed that the energy of his close combat shield was continuously decreasing. At the same time, he secretly calculated the time in his mind. He planned to leave immediately after the 3 minutes were up. He definitely wouldn't become a living target for Arc Herons. Something's wrong. Something's very wrong. On the other side, Arc Herons became more and more flustered. Arc Herons was also an outstanding schemer in his own world. He had destroyed more than half of the world of Azeroth. And at this moment, he suddenly recalled the scene when young Arthas raised Frostmourne. Go. Go now. Arc Herons abruptly gave up on attacking Sword Immortal Ling Shu, and immediately prepared to tear open the void and escape to the real world. Logically speaking, Arc Herons only needed to use his mind to immediately open a hole in the void and allow Arc Herons to escape. But at this moment, no matter what order Arc Herons gave, the void still didn't give Arc Herons any response. Senior Ling Shu, hurry and leave. It was also at this moment that Jiyu Xuanyuan's voice suddenly sounded in Sword Immortal Ling Shu's ears. Sword Immortal Ling Shu made a prompt decision and immediately left Archeron's attack range. Don't go. Seeing that Sword Immortal Ling Shu was about to leave, Arc Herons knew that something was wrong. He immediately chased after him in an attempt to keep Sword Immortal Ling Shu by his side. But at this moment, Arc Herons suddenly discovered that the void that he could originally move freely in suddenly became incomparably scorched. It was as if his legs were stuck in cement, and he could no longer move even a millimeter. Laws. The laws of the void have changed. It was only at this moment that Arc Herons suddenly realized that the laws of the void had changed. Or rather, the laws of the void had become chaotic. Could it be that there was an Emperor sword-level sword wielder hiding in the void to ambush him? Sword Immortal Ling Shu only felt a flash before his eyes, and he suddenly appeared behind Jiyu Shenyuan. At this moment, Jiyu Shenyuan was looking at him calmly. She didn't look any different from usual, but the long sword in her hand was now vibrating at an incomprehensible frequency. And as the long sword vibrated, a small vortex was gradually forming around the long sword. Sword Immortal Ling Shu could sense that the vortex represented chaos. This vortex was destroying the laws of the entire void. Go. Jiyu Xuanyuan's cherry lips spoke slightly, and the vortex on the Execution Immortal Sword slowly flew away from the Execution Immortal Sword. It flew toward Archeron's, who was imprisoned in the void. And on the other side, Archeron's also saw this vortex flying toward him. His pupils instantly dilated to the extreme. He could already sense the extreme chaos of the laws contained within the vortex. Run! Run! A tentacle on Archeron's brain directly detached from Archeron's head, and instantly turned into a small black ball that looked like a walnut. This small ball was Archeron's demon core, and also the source of Archeron's power. Generally speaking, the demon core was the safest when it stayed within one's body. Once it left one's body, even an ancient sword wielder could destroy one's demon core. But Archeron's couldn't care less. Right now, all he could do was let the demon core leave his body, and then explode with all the power contained within the demon core to forcefully create a small hole in the sealed void. This way, his demon core could escape from the void. Only then would he have a last chance of survival. Archeron's decision could not be said to be indecisive. If he had made this decision a second earlier, perhaps he could really escape from the void. However, he was still a second too late, and his death was destined. The laws of the void had already been completely changed. Even if the demon core exploded with all its power, it would not be able to break through the restraints of the void. In the end, the small vortex that represented the destruction of the laws collided with Archeron's body. Then, like an atomic bomb exploding, a huge mushroom cloud formed by the vortex rose up in the void. It completely destroyed everything around the mushroom cloud, and even that part of the void itself was destroyed. Shen Yuan. Your Majesty, Sword Immortal Ling Shu, who had witnessed Archeron's destruction, said in a daze. The woman beside him was definitely not a spirit sword wielder, but a true emperor sword wielder. Chapter 11:14. Of course I'm not an emperor sword level sword wielder. Otherwise, why would I need you to bring me into the void? After leaving the void, Jiyu Shenyuan, who was standing on the city wall, explained calmly to Sword Immortal Ling Shu, I'm just borrowing the rules of the void. But if you want to destroy the rules of the void, you must have the ability of an emperor sword level sword wielder. This can't be wrong, Sword Immortal Ling Shu said with some disbelief. That's where you're wrong. To enter the void, you must obtain the approval of the void. This is the prerequisite of becoming an immortal sword level sword wielder. But destroying the void doesn't require such a prerequisite. You just need to have enough destructive power and be able to see through the essence of the void. Seeing that Sword Immortal Ling Shu still didn't understand, Jiyu Shenyuan simply continued to explain. It's like if you want to enter a house, you must obtain the owner's permission and let the owner open the door for you before you can enter. This house is the void, and the owner of the void is the rules of the void. But once you enter this house, without the protection of the door, you can do whatever you want to this house, as long as you have the ability to defeat the owner who is in the way. Jiyu Shenyuan gave a vivid metaphor. But the owner of this house is an emperor sword level sword wielder. You must have the power of an emperor sword level sword wielder to be able to kill this owner. Sword Immortal Ling Shu still didn't understand. If the power of an emperor sword level sword wielder is equivalent to the power of an adult, and my power is that of a child, of course I can't defeat this adult with normal methods. But if I have a treasured sword that can cut through iron like mud, and that adult is unarmed, then wouldn't the result be different? Wouldn't a child be able to kill this adult with one strike? Jiyu Shenyuan continued. If that's the case. Sword Immortal Ling Shu seemed to have understood something, but he didn't completely understand. Then what is this sword that can destroy the void? Isn't the sword right here? Jiyu Shenyuan raised the slaying immortal sword in her hand and gestured in front of Sword Immortal Ling Shu. After that, the battle on the city wall fell into a complete stalemate. After learning that a U-rank, Yuan Ku, had been killed by Sword Immortal Ling Shu and Jiyu Shenyuan, the morale of the humans was extremely high. That flood rank Yuan Ku had already surrendered, and this U-rank Yuan Ku had truly died at the hands of the humans. What else did the humans have to fear? Kill these sons of B*keys, Yuan Ku. The morale of the humans was extremely high, and the Yuan Ku on the city wall were forced to retreat again and again. The top-tier U-rank Yuan Ku didn't dare to fight in order to preserve his own life, but Jiyu Shenyuan and sword immortal Ling Shu didn't let go of this opportunity. They appeared on the battlefield in a manner that completely crushed all the low-level Yuan Ku. Wherever Jiyu Shenyuan and sword immortal Ling Shu passed by, none of the Yuan Ku could survive for more than a minute. In this way, the casualties of the sword-bearers and sword maidens quickly decreased from dozens of people and hundreds of swords per minute to only a few people and a dozen swords per minute. As this went on, the humans entered a state of complete superiority. Gradually, the Yuan Ku that had climbed up the city wall were forced to a corner that was extremely close to the edge of the city wall. Some of the more courageous sword-bearers even ran out from the safety wall to fight alongside their sword maidens. This kind of situation naturally made Jiyu Shenyuan and sword immortal Ling Shu very satisfied. However, Alexander and Quetzalcoatl, who were huddled within the Yuan Ku army, began to feel uneasy again. Although these low-level Yuan Ku weren't worth a lot of money, they were still an important force for their own forces. If they lost too many of them here, not only would they not be able to answer to their superiors when they returned, even they themselves would feel extremely pained. Among them, the one who felt the most pained was probably Alexander. This time, the main force attacking Yuzhang City came from his Macedonian army. They were Alexander's direct subordinates. Alexander's heart was bleeding as he watched the subordinates that he had painstakingly cultivated fall on the city wall like grass being mowed down. "We can't go on like this, it's just a waste of our own strength." Alexander couldn't bear such losses anymore, and said to Quetzalcoatl beside him, "Then what do you plan to do? Are we going to take the risk and kill our way up there?" Quetzalcoatl pouted and waved his huge weapon. "If you want to go, go by yourself. I don't want to die there. What I mean is, can we order the army to retreat first? Don't engage in such pointless consumption," Alexander said. "I don't care, but if anything happens, you'll be responsible for it." "I won't care." Compared to Alexander, who felt extremely pained, Quetzalcoatl didn't care much about these Yuan Ku who had died in battle. Most of these Yuan Ku were Yuan Ku from the Greek and Norse divine systems. She didn't have many Yuan Ku from the Mayan divine systems, so she didn't feel bad about their deaths. She was just being generous at the expense of others. "I just feel that this is too depressing," Alexander said resentfully. "Let's not talk about the Western magical beast army. The Archerons are all dead, so it's natural for them to escape. But what's going on with the Fuso divine system and the heavenly court? We agreed to attack Yuzhang City together, but now we haven't even seen their shadows. We can't fight this battle." "What you said makes sense." Quetzalcoatl nodded. "Okay. Let's order the army to retreat and wait for those guys who came late." "Who said that we should withdraw the army? We, the Fuso divine system, won't agree to it." As soon as Feathered Serpent God finished speaking, he heard a haughty voice. Shortly after, a slender blonde girl in scarlet tight-fitting clothes came to Alexander and Feathered Serpent God's side. "Ahaha! My lovely Ashamasu-chan, you're finally here." Upon seeing the young lady, the Quetzalcoatlus immediately shook its huge opie and pulled the young lady into its embrace. After rubbing against the world-class opie for a minute or two, it finally released the young lady who was about to suffocate. B***starred woman, coquettish fox. The girl took a few deep breaths of fresh air and stared at Quetzalcoatl's unscientific opie. She pouted and spoke in dissatisfaction. "Miss Asuka, you're finally here. I thought you wouldn't show up." Seeing the blonde girl appear, Alexander finally heaved a long sigh of relief. The Fuso divine system had finally arrived. "I ran into a little trouble on the way." Asuka fanned herself. "But I've already thrown that trouble to Ling Bolai. I've brought all the elite troops of the Fuso divine system here." As soon as Asuka finished speaking, countless monsters appeared outside Yuzhang City. Most of these monsters were lantern-like ghosts, red-tongued ghosts, broom-like gods, lamp-carrying monks carrying small lanterns, and umbrella-like demons. These were the common rat-level and tiger-level Yuan Ku in Fuso mythology. Of course, there were also the rarer ghost-level and soul-level Yuan Ku, such as virgin girls, mercenaries, and butterfly spirits. There were also the more powerful white wolf, demonic fox, and two-mouthed woman, such as flood serpent and dragon-level Yuan Ku. These Yuan Ku formed the main force of the Fuso divine system. One had to admit that this time, the Fuso divine system had sent out most of its main force. Except for Yuan Ku, who was holed up on Fuso Island, almost 2/3 of the Fuso divine system's power on the continent had gathered here. They had brought out all their savings. Seeing so many Yuan Ku troops, Alexander's expression became much better. He also suppressed his dissatisfaction with the Fuso divine system. Since the people have already arrived, then hurry up and join the battle. Yuzhang City's city walls will soon be breached by us. If you don't contribute enough, don't blame us for not giving you a share of the spoils of war. Alexander immediately urged the Fuso divine branch to send their troops into the battle. Wait. Although Asuka was arrogant, she was not stupid. She had already noticed that something was wrong with the current situation. So she immediately said, "Didn't you just shout about retreating? I don't think it's because the walls of Yuzhang City are about to be breached, but because your troops are about to be driven out by the people of Yuzhang City. Come back." "Nonsense, can't you see that our troops have the upper hand?" Alexander said. "No, the situation is not right." Asuka muttered. "Where is Archimond? Where are the troops of the Western magical beasts? Didn't they say that they had arrived long ago? By the way, I saw many defeated troops of the Western magical beasts along the way. Alexander, you are also a person of status. Can you tell me the truth?" "Ayaya, now that we have to cooperate sincerely, it's best to tell everything. There's no need to hide anything. Don't you think so, my King Alexander?" The feathered serpent goddess smiled charmingly, then told Asuka everything that had just happened. "What? Archimond died in the void after entering it?" Asuka was also shocked by the news. Her expression made Alexander secretly happy. "You arrogant woman, you finally have your moment of surprise." But to Alexander's surprise, Asuka immediately calmed down after the initial shock. She even had a playful expression on her face, as if something very interesting had happened. "Then let me play with these humans first." Asuka waved to the sky, and a huge capsule broke through the void and appeared, wrapping Asuka's whole body. At the same time, the ground began to tremble violently, and the ground split open. A huge red robot emerged from the ground, and the capsule carrying Asuka instantly flew into the robot's body. The robot's eyes, which had been dead silent, suddenly shone with a scarlet light. Chapter 11:15. What's that? When the sword-bearers, as well as the ordinary humans, saw the robot that was even taller than Yuzhang City's city wall appear outside Yuzhang City through the windows of the safety wall, they all showed a terrified expression. This robot had a strong body and a body that was as sharp as a blade. It looked like a terrifying god. It's New Age gospel warrior too. Seeing the crimson robot appear, Sword Immortal Ling Shu and Jiyu Shenyuan both showed cautious and nervous expressions. They were not unfamiliar with this robot, because it was one of the trump cards of the Fusang Celestial System. It was the strongest robot, New Age Gospel Warrior 2. "Looks like the Fusang Celestial System's troops have arrived," Jiyu Shenyuan said with a frown. Actually, Yuzhang City had already been informed by Yuyang Fortress that the Fusang Celestial System's troops were included in this attack on Yuan Ku. Furthermore, the Fusang Celestial System was the first troop to appear in Yuyang Fortress's sights. However, they did not expect the Fusang Celestial System to arrive later than the other celestial systems. They did not know if there were any other changes. "How is it? Are you confident that you can deal with him?" Sword Immortal Ling Shu turned around and asked Jiyu Shenyuan very cautiously. The New Age Gospel Warriors did not appear many times in the battles between humans and Yuan Ku. The last battle was when Jiyu Jin Jendi led the attack on Fusang Island. Back then, under the leadership of Sword Monarch Yang Jin, the humans were singing a triumphant song. Soon, They occupied half of Fusang Island and wiped out all the Yuan bandits. During this time, a few very famous battles took place. One of them was the Battle of the Retreat of New Tokyo City. 3 New Age gospel warriors joined forces to fight against the human swordbearers. They forcefully stopped the human swordbearers for a full 3 hours and almost killed a sword immortal level swordbearer. After all the Yuan coup in New Tokyo City had retreated to a safe area, these 3 New Age gospel warriors also retreated to a safe area. From then on, the New Age gospel warriors became famous among Yuan coup and the humans. They became one of the most famous, powerful, and difficult to deal with U-level Yuan coup of the Fusang celestial system. I remember that the gospel warriors of the new era don't have the ability to enter the void, right? Jiyu Shenyuan asked calmly. That's not bad. Because the gospel warriors of the new era are human mechanical creations, they can't be recognized by the void and can't enter the void. Regardless of whether it's the weakest machine 2 or the most powerful machine 1, they're all the same. Neither of them can enter the void. Sword Immortal Ling Shu explained. Then that's easy. An opponent that can't enter the void, and such a huge opponent, I like it the most. Jiyu Shenyuan revealed a smile. This Yuzhang city is nothing special. Without the protection of that turtle shell, I can cross the city wall with one leg, Asuka, who was piloting plane number 2, said with satisfaction. She was about to step out with her slender red thighs, cross the city walls of Yuzhang City, and directly enter the ordinary district of Yuzhang City to wreak havoc when a tiny mosquito suddenly appeared on the radar of plane number 2. There's actually someone who dares to overestimate themselves and stop me. Asuka, who was in the cockpit, sneered. 12 windows opened on the arm of plane number 2, revealing 12 missile launchers loaded with missiles. With a single thought from Asuka, these missiles were fired one after another, all aimed at the fly that was flying toward plane number 2. This fly was naturally Jiyu Shenyuan, who had overestimated herself. The missiles launched by plane number 2 were all equipped with the most advanced guidance system. This guidance system wasn't the traditional thermal guidance system, but the most advanced telepathic guidance system. It could aim and guide the target according to the pilot's telepathic thoughts. As long as the opponent was within the pilot's line of sight, then they could accurately hit the target they wanted to aim at. At the same time, these missiles also had a super speed of 10 times the speed of sound. This was a speed that even immortal sword maidens might not have. La la la, la la la. Asuka hummed a little tune, happily waiting for the moment when her missiles hit the target. Just now, she had already used her radar to scan the body data of the fly and found that this fly was actually a small spirit sword level sword wielder. With this discovery, Asuka had no fear to speak of. A spirit sword level sword wielder was a level lower than her new era Evangelion. In Asuka's imagination, the opponent couldn't dodge her missiles at all and would be hit by her missiles very easily. At least 40% of her energy would be consumed. Left, missing, right side of the protective shield energy. But soon, Asuka could not hum the little tune anymore. Asuka was a little frightened to find that the missiles that were supposed to be controlled by her telepathic thoughts suddenly began to waver, as if there was a huge force fighting with her for the control of the missiles. Asuka immediately strengthened her telepathic thoughts, wanting to regain control of the missiles, but found that it was of no use at all. In the end, the missiles still lost her control, changed direction in the air, and finally bombarded plane number 2. This is impossible. No one can take away the control of my missiles. Although these missiles did not cause any serious damage, it gave Asuka a big blow. Because this was something that had never happened in previous battles. The missiles that she controlled either hit the target and exploded, or were directly defeated by the target's attack in the air. But now, turning around and being controlled by the enemy and finally falling on her and exploding was something that had never happened before. While Asuka was still wondering what happened just now, Jiyu Shenyuan had gradually approached the body of Asuka number 2. In fact, it was a very simple thing to seize the control of the missiles just now. Jiyu Shenyuan did not fight for the control of the missiles from the beginning to the end. In fact, the control was still in the hands of Asuka. But she controlled the airflow around the missiles. Comrades who had learned flight mechanics knew that the reason why planes and missiles could fly in the air was that they relied on the reaction force caused by fluid mechanics to objects. If someone could control all the airflow around the missile, it would be equivalent to a pair of invisible giant hands grabbing the missile and easily sending it back to where it came from. This was not the easiest way for Jiyu Shen Yuan. The easiest way was to blast out a few sword chi and directly give these missiles a chance in midair. But Jiyu Shen Yuan had the intention to teach this arrogant Miss Asuka an interesting lesson, and through this reversal of the plot, she gave Asuka a very shocking blow. I don't believe that you still have the ability to seize control of so many of my missiles. Asuka gritted her teeth and said. This time, not only did the missile launchers on her arms open, but even the missile launchers on her thighs and chest opened at the same time. A total of 108 missile launchers, more than 2,400 missiles were fired at the same time, and under the control of Asuka's mind, they shot towards the fly flying in the air. Idiot! A disdainful sneer appeared on Jiyu Shen Yuan's face. It seemed that it was just as the intelligence said, the pilot of number 2 was always a proud idiot. If the pilots of number 1 and number 0 were not by her side, she could have done a lot of very stupid things. For example, right now, she actually fired all the missiles in her body in one breath. It was not to say that firing all these missiles would completely deplete the missiles in number 2. There were at least 100,000 missiles stored in number 2's body, and firing more than 2,000 missiles at once was not a big deal for number 2. What was really important was that controlling the flight trajectory of each missile required a certain amount of the pilot's mental power and mental strength. More than 2,000 missiles were fired at the same time, and the pilot's mental strength was completely exhausted. If these missiles did not cause fatal damage to his enemies, then the number 2 helicopter would undoubtedly be wide open for Jiyu Shenyuan to deal with. 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven, Abyssal Golden Chrysanthemum. Jiyu Shenyuan did not even bother to change her moves. For the third time, she used the classic Abyssal Golden Chrysanthemum. A golden chrysanthemum bloomed in the air, and the fierce sword energy collided with the flying missiles. The entire sky was like a large string of firecrackers burning. Intense explosions sounded in the air one after another, like firecrackers burning during a wedding. In less than a minute, the more than 2,000 missiles all exploded in the sky, and the fog formed by the explosion shrouded the entire air. For a moment, whether it was the sword-bearer or Yuan Ku, their vision range was reduced to single digits. Activate the radar system at full power, find the location of that fly for me. Asuka, who felt dizzy, issued an order to her number 2 plane. At this time, the director's theory of smog anti-laser theory had fully proved its superiority. When the air was filled with gunpowder particles, even the most advanced radar system lost its function. Asuka used the last bit of her energy to activate the function of the radar to detect the location of that fly. Unfortunately, it was all too late. When Asuka finally found that damn fly, she was surprised to find that the fly was actually standing on the back of the neck of the number 2 mech, which was where Asuka's cockpit was located. Is this stupid fly trying to break through the armor of number 2 plane? The dizzy Asuka said disdainfully, doesn't he know that even the attack of an immortal sword-level sword mistress can't break through the defensive armor of my pilot cabin? Unless it's that emperor sword-level sword mistress of theirs. Warning. Warning. The outer armor of the pilot cabin has been destroyed. The outer armor of the pilot cabin has been destroyed. Before Asuka could finish her sentence, a series of intense alarms sounded in the pilot cabin. Chapter 11:16. There were 3 main reasons why the 3 New Era Evangelion robots could hold off the Swordsman army and the 4-sword immortal level swordsman for 3 hours. First, the gospel of the New Era's AoE attacks were very powerful. When all the missiles were fired, the sword immortal level swordbearers had to protect the weaker, low-level swordbearers to prevent them from being fatally injured. This, on the other hand, alleviated the attacks of the sword immortal level swordbearers, and bought more time for the New Era's gospel of the New Era. Another important reason was the powerful defense of the New Era Evangelion, as well as the power hidden within the outer armor. The armor on the body was comparable to diamond in defense. Other than the attack of the sword immortal level swordsman, No one else could damage this armor. The strongest armor was located in the cockpit of the Evangelion, which was the area at the back of the cervical vertebrae. The armor here was made of the best materials. In terms of strength, it was comparable to the strongest dimensional alloy. This was the armor that only immortal level swordsmen could damage. At the same time, the most important thing was that the new era Evangelion was not a simple robot. There was a living body hidden within the armor. Therefore, no matter how much damage was done to the other parts of the armor, as long as the armor at the cervical vertebrae was not broken, the swordsman would not be able to harm the pilot in the cockpit. If the pilot in the cockpit could not be harmed, then the new era Evangelion was equivalent to an immortal body. No matter what, it was impossible to destroy his existence. When Asuka found out that Jiyu Shenyuan had begun to damage the armor at the vertebrae, she was naturally disdainful. She did not believe that a immortal level swordsman would have the ability to damage her armor that was comparable to Emperor alloy. But reality made Asuka despair. The opponent just had to destroy the armor that she was so proud of. In just 3 minutes, the outermost armor at the vertebrae had a hole big enough for the opponent to crawl in. It's okay. I still have Adam's body. This immortal level swordsman will not be able to break through Adam's body no matter what. Although Asuka could comfort herself like this, when she thought of her optimistic view of the hardness of the outermost armor, Asuka suddenly lost her confidence. This is a little troublesome. In fact, it was just as Asuka had imagined. Adam's body posed a considerable obstacle to Jiyu Shenyuan. The outermost armor was the best for Jiyu Shenyuan. This was because Jiyu Shenyuan was currently wielding the exterminating immortal sword, an existence that in essence surpassed an emperor sword like the Shenyuan sword. It would not be difficult for such a sword to break through the protection of emperor alloy. Jiyu Shenyuan only needed to use a little force to stab the Zhuxian sword into the armor, and easily opened a hole in the neck of Unit 2. What Jiyu Shenyuan found difficult to deal with was the mysterious body under the armor. Jiyu Shenyuan had long known that the gospel of the new era wasn't just a simple robot, and that there was a very mysterious body hidden under his tough armor. This body had a strong explosive power and terrifying recovery ability, which was the fundamental reason why the gospel warriors of the new era could fight for such a long time. Once the new era gospel warrior entered a berserk state, then the new era gospel warrior would, for a short period of time, burst out with a terrifying power equivalent to that of the universe stage Yuan Ku. This kind of body feels similar to Bastet and the others. Every cell seems to be filled with divine power. Jiyu Shenyuan tested the conventional method and found that he really didn't seem to have any way to deal with this body. The exterminating immortal sword was still sharp, and could easily stab into this body. But the problem was that once the exterminating immortal sword was stabbed, he felt a mysterious force sucking the exterminating immortal sword. The exterminating immortal sword seemed to be integrated with this body. If Jiyu Shenyuan didn't burst out a large amount of sword chi in an instant, perhaps he wouldn't even be able to pull out the exterminating immortal sword. Haha. This ant, sure enough, there's no change in Adam's body. It's impossible for him to threaten me. After discovering that this fly stayed on the periphery of Adam's body, Asuka suddenly became active again. I'll let you have a taste of the power of the parting young dagger. Asuka controlled Mecha number 2 to pull out an incomparably sharp parting young dagger from her calf. This dagger was made of the same material as the spine armor, which was the same grade of material as the Imperial alloy. At the same time, she used black technology to add a layer of flowing positive ions to the dagger. This kind of dagger could cause unparalleled damage to both the sword maiden and the sword wielder. Those flowing positive ions could even directly pass through the sword maiden's personal shield. Without breaking through the personal shield, they could cause fatal damage to the sword maiden's body. At this time, Asuka pulled out the parting young dagger from Mecha number 2. Naturally, there was only one goal, and that was to kill the fly that was already hiding near her cockpit. What was even more amazing was that because of the restrictions of the rest of the armor, this fly could only stay near the broken entrance, and couldn't escape to any other place. This was as if it was fixed to her neck, and Asuka's parting young dagger could stab into Jiyu Shenyuan's body even with her eyes closed. It could be imagined that if such a dagger were to stab into Ji Xuanyuan's body without any personal shield protection, the consequences would be very terrifying. Looks like our Miss Asuka is ready to use the parting young dagger. With Guhan's intelligence, of course, he could guess that when he was blocked in the cockpit, this arrogant pilot Miss Asuka would definitely not hesitate to use the parting young dagger to deal with him. Since that's the case, I can only try this move. Ji Xuanyuan's mouth revealed a faint smile, and at the same time, the Zhuxian sword in her hand was slightly pressed against Adam's flesh. Chaos Sword Art, Chaotic Golden Lotus. Ji Xuanyuan's cherry lips slightly spat out, and an inexplicable hidden force burst forth from the Zhuxian sword, and instantly passed through Adam's entire body. Adam's body stirred in a strange way. Speaking of which, this chaotic golden lotus had an indissoluble bond with robots. The fourth move of the Chaos Sword Art was also used to fight against robots. But at that time, Guhan was fighting against the third German Reich of the Führer. As a similarly space-class robot, in terms of pure defense, the third German Reich of the third German Reich's defense was not inferior to the outer armor of the Gospel of the New Era. However, compared to Adam's physical body, it was still slightly lacking. At that time, Guhan only had a Chijian sword in his hand, and its nature was far from comparable to the Zhuxian sword that Guhan was holding now. More importantly, at that time, Guhan was restricted from using sword essence, but now, Guhan could use a large amount of sword essence without restraint. Under such circumstances, the second appearance of the chaotic golden lotus in reality exploded with a powerful damaging and penetrating ability. Even Adam's divine body could not resist the effects of the chaotic golden lotus's hidden force. Although the layer of skin on the surface of the fleshly body was unscathed, but the muscles under the skin had already been twisted into a lump of meat paste by Ji Xuanyuan's sword qi. This time, Ji Xuanyuan used the execution immortal sword in his hand to easily draw a circle, and successfully broke Adam's fleshly body. This time, it's time for a fly to die, right? Feeling her young Li dagger stabbing into Adam's body, Asuka couldn't help but think proudly. But at this moment, a buzzing sound like that of a fly rang in her ears. What's going on? Asuka raised her head in panic, and following the source of the sound, she saw that there was a black line on the top of her cockpit that was constantly extending forward. Soon, this black line extended into a closed oval. No. Asuka hurriedly wanted to activate the ejection button, and eject the cockpit from the body of No. 2 aircraft. But she immediately acted, and a powerful arm stretched out from the broken cockpit entrance, and a fist directly hit Asuka's head. Asuka's eyes instantly rolled back, and she directly fainted, and was forcibly pulled out of the cockpit by this arm. What happened? When the smoke formed by the missile explosion gradually dissipated, the body of No. 2 aircraft once again appeared in front of everyone. But whether it was Yuan Ku or the sword-bearers, they were deeply puzzled. The No. 2 aircraft that was alive and kicking and constantly firing all kinds of missiles just now. At this moment, it suddenly stood motionless in the same place like a statue, as if it had lost all its life force. Look at the neck of No. 2 aircraft. Feathered Serpent God, who had the sharpest eyes, was the first to discover what happened to No. 2 aircraft. There was a hole in the neck of No. 2 aircraft, and a human sword-bearer grabbed the bright red Asuka and jumped out of the neck, and in an instant, returned to the city wall. A universe-level Yuan Ku, the pilot of the New Era Evangelion, my lovely Asuka was captured just like that. Feathered Serpent God shook his chest in a somewhat stupefied manner, and looked at Alessander, who was also stupefied, and said, "How would I know?" Alessander also had an expression of great pressure. Although the strength of that woman Asuka is terrible, and she can't even compare to a ghost-level Yuan Ku, it's impossible for me to break the defense of her cockpit. But even if I want to break the defense of her cockpit, it's impossible. How did this spirit sword-level sword wielder do it? I understand, it must be that Emperor sword-level sword-bearer who secretly made a move. Feathered Serpent God said with certainty. That's right. I guessed so too. Alessander echoed. Chapter 11:17. So painful, broken bone, really broken bone. Ling Bolai, you stupid woman. I, Asuka, Will not let you go. Asuka was like a dead dog as she was directly thrown onto the city wall from more than 100 meters in the air by Jiyu Shenyuan. As a result, there was a clear cracking sound as Asuka's leg bone was directly broken. No way. This is a U-level Yuan coup, and it's broken so easily. Asuka fell right next to a safety wall. The swordsmen inside the safety wall all poked their heads out and spoke in disbelief. They couldn't believe that a U-level Yuan coup could actually break his leg bone after falling from a height of 100 meters. This didn't make any sense at all, okay? The words of these swordsmen also entered Asuka's ears. Asuka's ears instantly turned red with shame and anger, and she couldn't criticize Ling Bolai like before. I really don't know how you guys study Yuan coup normally. That new era gospel mecha is only a U-level Yuan coup, and its pilot is just a Yuan coup that's slightly stronger than the average person. It's already a miracle that he didn't lose his life after falling from the sky. What's so strange about a mere broken bone? Sword Immortal Ling Shu instantly traversed through space and arrived near Asuka. He spoke to the chattering sword-wielding cultivators around him, answering their questions. I was the one who captured you. What does that have to do with Ling Bolai? Jiyu Shenyuan slowly descended from the sky. She was very curious as to why Asuka would yell at Ling Bolai. If it wasn't for Ling Bolai's delay on the way, and Machine Zero wasn't by my side, so I couldn't use my AT stance, how could I have lost to a shameless woman like you? If I could use my AT stance, even 10 of you wouldn't be a match for me. Asuka grimaced as she spoke, as if the reason for her failure was completely because of Ling Bolai. Lung Qingqiu finally remembered that the new era gospel did indeed have the AT stance ability, but it just hadn't been used yet. Lung Qingqiu had thought that Asuka had been careless, but it turned out that this AT field could only be used when 2 new era Evangelions were present. AT field was the strongest defensive skill of the new era Evangelion. It was similar to a sword wielder's personal shield. It could defend against all attacks. In other words, as long as the attack existed, it could be defended. What was even more frightening was that this AT field was not like the sword wielder's personal shield, which had a certain energy limit. As long as all the energy of the personal shield was consumed, it could be broken by the sword wielder's personal shield. New Age Evangelion's AT field did not have this limitation. Its defensive energy had a limit, but there was no energy consumption. A large number of attacks would never run out. There were only 2 ways to break through the defense of an AT field. One was to use an attack that exceeded the upper limit of the AT field's defense. The other way was to use another AT field of the same origin to neutralize the opponent's AT field. From the incomplete New Era Evangelion CD-ROM that humans found in the ruins, the AT field was actually a biological field that every living creature possessed. Generally speaking, the biological field of a living creature did not have any defensive capabilities. However, the New Era Evangelion strengthened and modified this biological field into an AT field that could defend against everything. Don't blame your partner. Don't forget that I'm a human, and I didn't activate my personal shield during the battle, Jiyu Shenyuan said to Asuka faintly after thinking for a while. Asuka didn't feel good after hearing this. The AT field of the New Era Evangelion originated from the legendary ancestors of mankind, Adam and Lilith. Therefore, the AT field of the New Era Evangelion was actually homologous to the AT field of the human race. This way, as long as the sword wielder did not activate his personal shield and relied on his own body to get close to the New Era Evangelion, then the AT field of the human race could perfectly neutralize the AT field of the New Era Evangelion. The AT field of the New Era Evangelion was meaningless to the human race. However, how many humans in this world could rely on their own body to fight against the New Era Evangelion without activating their personal shield? Therefore, our Miss Asuka had never encountered such a situation before. How could this be? I actually lost to a pure human. Asuka's spirit seemed to be on the verge of collapsing from Jiyu Shenyuan's words. I really don't understand you animals. You're clearly humans, but you still look down on us like this and even try to destroy us humans. You're all F***king trash, you're even worse than animals, Sword Immortal Ling Shu said indignantly. This was also the mentality of many humans. Although the original mission of the Yuan coup was to destroy the human race, this was the fundamental reason for their existence. However, when they thought about the fact that the other party was also a human, many humans felt extremely uncomfortable and furious. Humans are incomplete. They're the most useless, the most trashy creatures. They shouldn't exist in this world in the first place, Asuka murmured with her head lowered. Her words were filled with resentment towards humans. This made Jiyu Shenyuan feel very strange. Most of the human Yuan coup continued to fight humans because of their filth, but this Miss Asuka seemed to hate humans from the bottom of her heart. Even if there was no filth, her ultimate goal was probably to destroy the human race. There's nothing to say to this kind of Yuan coup. Just kill her with one strike. With the credit of killing 2 universe-rank Yuan coup, and with me as your witness, there might still be a chance for the situation with Shijua Yuan. Sword Immortal Ling Shu shook his head and suggested to Jiyu Shenyuan. At the same time, he also indicated that he hoped to use the credit of killing 2 universe-rank Yuan coup to make up for the fact that Jiyu Shenyuan killed Shijua Yuan. Unless I become the emperor, there's no point in killing more universe-rank Yuan coup. Moreover, I don't think killing Shijua Yuan is a mistake, so there's no need to use the credit to make up for it. Master Ling Shu, you don't need to say anything more. Jiyu Shenyuan said indifferently, as if she didn't care about Shijua Yuan at all. As for this Asuka, there's no rush to kill her. Didn't she say earlier that Ling Bolai was delayed on her way here? I'm afraid that she'll arrive outside of Yuzhong City soon. At that time, with Asuka in our hands, we'll be able to make her hesitate. I didn't think of that. Hearing Jiyu Shenyuan say this, Sword Immortal Ling Shu didn't say anything else. On the other hand, when Asuka heard that Jiyu Shenyuan planned to use her to threaten Ling Bolai, she instantly exploded. Her leg was clearly broken, but she still used her hands to prop herself up. She clenched her teeth and said fiercely, "You're going to kill me now? I don't want to owe that B*tch any favors." Slap. Jiyu Shenyuan slapped Asuka's head, causing the blonde girl to faint. Then, she threw Asuka into the nearby safety wall and handed her over to the sword bearers inside the wall to watch over. Since Asuka was no longer piloted by the gospel of the new era, she was just an ordinary human. These sword bearers were enough to keep a tight watch on her. As for whether or not these sword bearers would do something indescribable to the beautiful and adorable Asuka, Jiyu Shenyuan couldn't be bothered to care. It was just Yuan coup. If he was raped, then so be it. It was a good opportunity for everyone to vent their anger after fighting for so long. Following the defeat of the new era's gospel of the new era, the Japanese Yuan coup army brought by Asuka began to slowly retreat before they could even get close to the city wall. If it weren't for the fact that Asuka was still alive, the entire Japanese army might have begun to collapse. F***CK. I can't go on like this anymore. I'm done playing. Seeing that Asuka had been captured alive by the enemy in just a few minutes, Alessander suddenly became even more terrified. At the same time, the heavy losses of his own troops also made Alessander unwilling to continue fighting a war of attrition. He began to slowly order his troops to retreat. Naturally, Quetzalcoatl couldn't continue fighting alone. When Alessander gave the order to retreat, he also ordered his troops to retreat. Thus, in the blink of an eye, the entire city wall fell silent. There wasn't a single living Yuan coup to be seen. This scene caused the sword-bearers inside the safety wall to cheer again. This was a victory for them. At the same time, these sword-bearers also rushed out from the safety wall and put their sword maidens back into their scabbards to speed up the recovery of the energy of their personal shields. Humans began to quickly recover their lost energy. At the same time, there were only 2 hours left before the super-dimensional wall system was reactivated. As long as they held on for another 2 hours, the thrilling defense of Yuzhong City would completely end, and Yuzhong City would usher in another victory. But would things really go so smoothly? Chapter 11:18. Just as the morale of the human army was soaring high on the battlefield, a large cloud of golden light suddenly appeared at the end of the sky. Waves of impassioned drumming could be heard coming from the cloud. When this cloud neared Yuzhang City, one could see elite warriors dressed in silver armor standing on top of it. It's the Heavenly Court's heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals. They're finally here. The sword-bearers in the safety wall suddenly became a little flustered, even though they had already anticipated the arrival of the Heavenly Court's army. But when the army really appeared, the sword-bearers couldn't help but feel a little panicked. I wonder which deity from the Heavenly Court has come this time, Sword Immortal Ling Shu said worriedly as he looked at the densely packed heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals in the sky. It's most likely Erlang Shen, Yang Jian, Jiyu Shenyuan said with certainty. Oh, why? Sword Immortal Ling Shu asked curiously. Master Sword Immortal Ling Shu, you're from Los Angeles after all, so you don't know much about our Yuzhang City's history. Ever since Yuzhang City was founded, Erlang Shen, Yang Jian, has never been absent from any of the Heavenly Court's attacks on Yuzhang City. I think this time will be no exception. Jiyu Shenyuan said with a slightly playful expression. To our Yuzhang City, Erlang Shen, Yang Jian, is our most familiar old friend. Sure enough, when the Heavenly Court's large golden cloud stopped, a small purple cloud flew above Yuzhang City by itself. On it stood an extremely handsome great general dressed in shining golden armor with a single eye on his forehead. It was Erlang Shen, Yang Jian, an old friend that everyone in Yuzhang City was very familiar with. Yuzhang City scoundrels, how dare you fight with me, Erlang Shen? This Heavenly Court official's son, the Jade Emperor's nephew, Comrade Yang Jian, waved the three-pointed, double-edged sword in his hand in provocation. Seeing Comrade Yang Jian's challenge, both the sword-bearers in the safety wall and the civilians in the underground shelters felt a headache coming on. This kind of challenge was also an old trick that the people of Yuzhang City were most familiar with. Every time Yang Jian represented the Heavenly Court to besiege Yuzhang City, Yang Jian would jump out and challenge the sword-bearer of Yuzhang City to a duel. This gave the people of Yuzhang a headache. Yang Jian's one-on-one fight was not just a simple one-on-one fight, but it was a tacit agreement between Yang Jian and Yuzhang City. If Yang Jian lost in a one-on-one fight, then Yang Jian and his subordinates, the 6 brothers of the Maishan Mountain, would not participate in the subsequent attack on Yuzhang City. Even if the high and mighty Jade Emperor spoke, Yang Jian would still keep his promise. He had never broken his promise. Do not underestimate the combat strength of Yang Jian's 1200 grass gods. Each of them was equivalent to a spirit realm Yuan Ku, and after being trained by Yang Jian for a long time, they had grasped a powerful formation. When these 1200 grass gods worked together to cast this formation, it was equivalent to the combat strength of a universe realm Yuan Ku. What was even more terrifying was that Yang Jian himself could combine with this formation. Once combined, Yang Jian's combat strength could break through the universe realm and reach the flood realm. One could imagine the threat he posed to humans. Being able to make such a terrifying opponent withdraw from the battle ahead of time would undoubtedly greatly relieve the pressure on Yuzhang City. On the other hand, if Yang Jian won, then the defeated sword mistress and her sword-bearer would be taken to his Erlang Supreme Temple at the mouth of the river to be servants for 3 years. The sword mistress would be responsible for bringing tea and water to Yang Jian, while the sword-bearer would be responsible for cleaning the entire temple. This could be said to be a great humiliation, but fortunately, Yang Jian would kill the sword-bearer like the other Yuan Ku. As long as the losers obediently worked for 3 years, Yang Jian would be able to release them in one piece. In terms of life and death, they would not be in any fatal danger. Purely from the perspective of victory and defeat, this one-on-one battle was actually a great advantage for Yuzhang City. If Yuzhang City won, they would be able to eliminate an opponent equivalent to a flood realm Yuan Ku. If Yuzhang City lost, they would only have to pay the price of an immortal sword-level swordbearer's pride and 3 years of time. No matter how one looked at it, this was a very good deal, but Yuzhang City rarely made such a deal. This was because Yang Jian's ability was too high. Unless there was an immortal sword-level swordbearer who coordinated with the top few immortal sword-level swordmistresses, there was no doubt that Yang Jian would lose in a one-on-one battle. Since the result was certain that Yang Jian would lose, there was naturally no point in betting. Therefore, although Yang Jian would challenge Yuzhang City every time, There were very few records of Yuzhang City actually accepting the challenge. It was less than 1 out of 10 times. Therefore, Yang Jian thought that his challenge this time would be as fruitless as before. After a habitual yell, he prepared to return to his celestial army and prepare to deploy troops to attack Yuzhang City. Suddenly, a devastatingly beautiful woman rose from the walls of Yuzhang City and stood opposite Yang Jian, facing him in the sky above Yuzhang City. Oh! I didn't expect Yuzhang City to be so bold this time. They actually dare to send someone to fight me one-on-one. Yang Jian's expression was a little surprised and a little disdainful. Hey! Do you want to fight me, Yang Jian, one-on-one? Yang Jian narrowed his eyes and raised his chin. He spoke to Jiyu Shenyuan in a condescending tone. That's right. Could it be that divine Erlang True Lord is afraid? Jiyu Shenyuan imitated him and her tone was just as disdainful. Oh, do you know the rules for fighting me one-on-one? If you don't, you'd better ask your elders. Otherwise, you'll have to spend 3 years crying at my place, Yang Jian mocked. Of course I do. Jiyu Shenyuan nodded and said. First, you are not allowed to send an Emperor Sword Mistress or an Emperor Sword Wielder to fight you. Jiyu Shenyuan stated Yang Jian's first rule. Yang Jian was a universe-level Yuan Ku. If he sent an Emperor Sword Mistress or an Emperor Sword Wielder, Yang Jian would definitely lose. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with this rule. Second, you are not allowed to enter the emptiness. Whoever enters the emptiness will be considered the loser. This was Yang Jian's second rule. Erlang Shen, Yang Jian, liked to fight to his heart's content. Moreover, once one side fell into the void and sincerely tried to stall for time, the battle would become devoid of passion. This was something Yang Jian deeply hated, so he took the initiative to propose this rule. Third, the sword wielder is not allowed to change sword mistresses. Yang Jian is also not allowed to summon his howling celestial dog to help. This was the rule that Yang Jian and the sword wielder had proposed. If the sword wielder could change sword mistresses, then the sword wielder could engage in an endless battle of attrition. As long as he used a low-level sword mistress to stall for time, he could allow the celestial sword mistress to recover a lot of protective shield energy. To Yang Jian, this was undoubtedly very disadvantageous. Moreover, Yang Jian's howling celestial dog was an underworld-level Yuan Ku. If it fought with Yang Jian, it could greatly strengthen Yang Jian's fighting ability. This was something that the sword wielder could not accept. Therefore, both parties had come to this tacit agreement. Chapter 11-19. You people from Yuzhang City seem to be very familiar with these rules. Erlang Shen Yang Jian nodded his head in disdain, and mercilessly mocked, since you know the rules, then let your immortal sword-level sword wielder come out and fight with me. This is really strange. Your immortal sword-level sword wielder has the guts to fight with me, but doesn't dare to face me face. You can only send out a junior. This is really laughable. I think Lord Xiansheng Erlang Shen Jun may have misunderstood. The one fighting with you is not someone else, but this insignificant one. Jiyu Shenyuan said proudly. You. Erlang Shen Jun's face finally revealed a shocked expression. He carefully looked at Jiyu Shenyuan up and down, and still asked in disbelief, I didn't misread your level right. Little girl, what's wrong with you? A mere spirit sword-level sword wielder actually has the guts to challenge me. Don't tell me you want to serve me tea that much. I think you should put away your guts and call out your cowardly immortal sword-level sword wielder. Yang Jian shook his head. May I ask Xiansheng Erlang Shen Jun, in your rules, is there a rule that spirit sword-level sword wielder cannot participate in the battle? Jiyu Shenyuan asked without changing her expression. That's not it. Yang Jian shook his head helplessly. From this question, he already understood Jiyu Shenyuan's intention. Then there was nothing more to say. Hurry up and defeat this little girl, so as not to waste time here. Fine. Since you want to be my maid, I won't stop you. Release your sword, lady, Yang Jian said with a disinterested look. No need, let's start the battle now. I'm still waiting to go back to eat. Jiyu Shenyuan's words almost choked Yang Jian to death. You little girl, You really don't know what's good for you. With your shallow years, what abilities do you have? Hurry up and release your sword, lady. Otherwise, if I'm not careful, I might just cut off your head. That wouldn't be worth it. Although Yang Jian's words were mocking, there was a rare sense of concern in his words, as if he was protecting Jiyu Shenyuan's life. Dare I ask, true monarch Yansheng Erlang, is there a rule in your rules that only the sword maiden herself can fight, and the sword wielder cannot fight with you? Jiyu Shenyuan once again rebutted true monarch Erlang's words. Immortal Erlang Yang Jian didn't say anything. He just felt a nameless fire rising from his heart and quickly burning his whole body. Since you don't know what's good for you, little girl, don't blame me for being ruthless. True monarch Erlang, Yang Jian, raised the 3-point, double-edged saber in his hand and said in an awe-inspiring manner, "This true monarch will stand here and not move. I will give you 30 moves. If you can make this true monarch take a step back, then this true monarch loses." TSK. Jiyu Shenyuan spat. Is this Erlang Zhenjuan's head filled with shit? At a time like this, he was still trying to act cool. Even if there was no shit in his head, Jiyu Shenyuan would beat the shit out of him. First move, primal chaos split the heavens. True monarch Erlang gave Jiyu Shenyuan 30 moves. However, Jiyu Shenyuan wanted to end true monarch Erlang in a single move. Therefore, she started off with the first move of the primal chaos sword art. It was also the most violent single target attack move in the primal chaos sword art. Although the move primal chaos split the heavens was extremely powerful, it looked ordinary on the surface. It was like a move used by a 3-year-old child. Therefore, when Jiyu Shenyuan used this move, true monarch Erlang Yang Jian didn't care about this move at all. He only slightly raised the 2-point saber in front of him vertically. In true monarch Erlang Yang Jian's imagination, this vertical move would be able to seal off all of Jiyu Shenyuan's following moves. She would be able to receive it effortlessly. As for the beginning of the story, it was just as Yang Jian imagined. The 3-point, double-edged saber in his hand had indeed blocked Jiyu Shenyuan's sword. However, Yang Jian's expression suddenly changed. He suddenly felt that the 3-point, double-edged saber in his hand had transmitted a burst of heaven and earth-splitting power. Under his carelessness, Yang Jian was caught off guard. He didn't even have the time to use the immortal energy in his body. The 3-point, double-edged saber in his hand had already left his hand and flew a few hundred meters away. You! Yang Jian's words hadn't even left his mouth. Jiyu Shenyuan's following attack was like a surging tide. Yang Jian, who had lost his weapon, was suffering from his previous words. He couldn't move his body to avoid Jiyu Shenyuan's attack. He also couldn't retrieve his weapon, the 3-point, double-edged saber. He could only use his pair of flesh palms to deal with the spiritual sword in Jiyu Shenyuan's hand. Even if this true monarch only has one hand left, I'm still not someone that a junior like you can bully. Yang Jian's heart was embarrassed and angry. He decided to bring out 70% to 80% of his ability. At the same time, he began to circulate the 9 revolutions mysterious art. Yang Jian's pair of flesh palms that were originally the color of flesh instantly turned golden. It was as if they were made of pure gold. The 9 revolutions mysterious art was the strongest body refining divine art in the legends. When cultivated to an extremely profound level, the body would be like the hardest iron and stone in the world. It was not the slightest bit inferior to those famous spears and swords. So one must not underestimate this pair of flesh palms. Purely from the strength of the weapon, the hardness of this pair of flesh palms was not inferior to Yang Jian's weapon, the 3-point, double-edged saber. And it was precisely because Yang Jian had this divine art to protect his body that he dared to continue to fulfill his promise. He planned to use his own flesh palms to deal with Jiyu Shenyuan's next attack. But after just a few moves, Yang Jian began to regret it. Because this woman's strength was far beyond Yang Jian's imagination. First of all, the opponent's swordsmanship was like a heavenly steed soaring through the sky. It completely violated all the common sense in the world. 1 second she was still in front of Yang Jian. The next second, the blade had already circled to Yang Jian's back. And all of Yang Jian's skill in using weapons fell on the body of the three-point, double-edged saber. He didn't have any achievements in his palm technique. From the beginning to the end, he didn't even touch Jiyu Xuanyuan's weapon. His body was already cut by Jiyu Shenyuan more than a dozen wounds. A large amount of immortal blood gushed out from the wounds. It made Yang Jian's body stained with blood. At this time, Yang Jian could no longer care about the promise of not moving for 30 moves. His body suddenly leaped into the air, dodging Jiyu Xuanyuan's next attack. At the same time, his pair of flesh palms grabbed the Zhuxian sword in Jiyu Xuanyuan's hand. The 9 Revolutions mysterious art was operated to the extreme, trying to directly break the sword lady in Jiyu Xuanyuan's hand. For Yang Jian, this was not something impossible. The 9 Revolutions mysterious art was unparalleled in the world. The number of spirit sword lady that Yang Jian had broken in his hand was not less than 1,000. Even if he couldn't break this sword lady in one strike, Yang Jian believed that he could still give this sword a fatal blow. After a few more strikes, it would break. But what Yang Jian did not expect was that when he grabbed the sword with both hands and prepared to exert force, a familiar feeling gushed out from the sword. The sharp sword qi spun and Yang Jian felt his hands loosen. All 10 of his fingers were separated from Yang Jing's hands in an instant, falling down like flowers scattered by a celestial maiden. It was just a single sword qi, but it actually directly cut off all 10 of Yang Jian's fingers. Zhuxian sword. Yang Jian was too familiar with this feeling. He was so familiar with it that even after 10,000 years, he still firmly remembered it, never forgetting it for a moment. Chapter 1120. Woman. Why is the execution immortal sword in your hands? This time, Yang Jian completely disregarded the promise of not moving. He flew back a few dozen steps, and at the same time, reached out his hand to summon the three-pointed, double-edged blade back. However, although the weapon was back in his hands, Yang Jian still did not feel the slightest sense of security. Who asked Jiyu Shenyuan to hold such a terrifying execution immortal sword? What's so strange about the execution immortal sword being in my hands? Jiyu Shenyuan brandished the sword. It hasn't even been 30 moves, but you've already broken your promise. Does that mean I've won? Yang Jian's face instantly swelled up like a pig's liver. This kind of embarrassed expression was rarely seen on the wise and extraordinary handsome Erlang true monarch Yang Jian. This true monarch has lost. This true monarch keeps his word. Yang Jian was still the Erlang true monarch after all. He readily admitted his defeat. However, Yang Jian continued, but this true monarch is not convinced. You're just relying on the execution immortal sword in your hands. Without the sharpness of the execution immortal sword, you are no match for this true monarch. Why is the dignified Erlang true monarch spouting so much nonsense? Jiyu Shenyuan simply ignored Yang Jian's provocation and said with a look of disdain, if you don't want to keep your promise, then let's fight again. I, Jiyu Shenyuan, will accompany you to the end. Nonsense. Once I say it, I will never go back on my words. I have already admitted defeat just now. My 1,200 grass-headed gods, howling celestial hound, and other subordinates will immediately withdraw from the battlefield. I will not go back on my word. As soon as Yang Jian's voice fell, a part of the golden cloud in the sky parted and slowly retreated in the direction it came from. In just a few minutes, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never come to Yuzhang City. Then what do you mean, Erlang true monarch? Jiyu Xuanyuan's expression eased up a lot. In addition to my 1,200 grass gods, the heavenly court still has 50,000 celestial soldiers and generals here. If these 50,000 celestial soldiers and generals all attack Yuzhang City, I'm afraid you will also suffer heavy losses. Yang Jian laid out his bargaining chip. Then what does your Highness Erlang want me to do in order to be willing to return these 50,000 celestial soldiers? Jiyu Shenyuan saw through Yang Jian's intentions and asked. Very simple, you and I will fight again, but you are not allowed to use the Zhuxian sword, you must change to another sword. After half a day, it turned out that this was Yang Jian's purpose. The information from the Sword Council clearly states that this true monarch Erlang, Yang Jian, is someone who cares about his reputation. Being defeated by a human like me without releasing the sword Maiden will definitely embarrass him, so he has to defeat me again. But the immortal slaying sword in my hand has an extremely high damage bonus to Yuan Ku, who is higher than the dragon level. Even Yang Zhen's 9 revolutions mysterious art can't resist the sword chi of the immortal slaying sword. So, as long as I have the execution immortal sword in my hand, Yang Zhen won't have the guts to continue fighting with me. That's why he wants me to give up the execution immortal sword. In just a few words, Jiyu Shen Yuan had completely guessed Yang Zhen's thoughts. I'm afraid that's impossible. Jiyu Shen Yuan shook her head and said, my current situation is a little special. My arm has already become one with the execution immortal sword. I can't let go of the execution immortal sword. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint True Monarch Erlang. Become one. True Monarch Erlang, Yang Zhen's third eye on his forehead suddenly opened, a scarlet light shot out from his third eye, directly shooting at Jiyu Shen Yuan's hand that was tightly holding onto the execution immortal sword. Not long later, Yang Zhen's third eye closed once again, his expression solemn as he nodded and said, that's right, the current you is indeed unable to let go of the execution immortal sword. Since that's the case, then I hope that True Monarch Erlang will fulfill his promise and leave quickly. I will deal with these 50,000 heavenly soldiers. There's no need for True Monarch Erlang to worry. Jiyu Shen Yuan immediately said. How about this? Yang Zhen still didn't give up. You can still use the execution immortal sword, but you are not allowed to use any sword essence. I also won't use any immortal energy. You and I will fight on this city wall with just our physical bodies. We'll definitely win and lose. How about that? Yang Zhen's suggestion sounded very fair, but in reality, it was very unfair. What kind of cultivation technique was Yang Zhen cultivating? That was the famous 9 revolutions mysterious art, that was the most profound body cultivation technique in the world. It trained the strength of the physical body. At this moment, even if Yang Zhen didn't use his immortal energy, he still had the strength of a Yu realm Yuan Ku, but on the contrary, if Jiyu Shen Yuan didn't use sword essence, the difference between her and Yang Zhen's physical body was like a high-speed rail and a green train. They weren't even on the same level. Me. Jiyu Shen Yuan saw through Yang Zhen's thoughts. She snorted in disdain and said, True Monarch Erlang really has the face to speak. How about I use sword chi, and True Monarch Erlang use saber chi to fight? Our weapons won't cross. True Monarch Erlang won't have to worry about being injured by my execution immortal sword. Yang Zhen was choked by Jiyu Shen Yuan to the point that he was speechless. Jiyu Shen Yuan's suggestion sounded fair, but in reality, it was as unfair as Yang Zhen's suggestion. Yang Zhen was proficient in close combat. Although he had great attainments in the 3-point, double-edged blade, Yang Zhen had never meticulously studied a technique like saber chi. This was because his powerful close combat ability did not require him to study such a technique. On the contrary, every sword wielder was very proficient in sword chi. After all, sword wielder wouldn't dare to expose their physical body to the enemy's direct attack, so if they were to compete in saber chi and sword chi, the one who would lose would undoubtedly be Yang Zhen. Ah! True Monarch Erlang Yang Zhen's face turned red. He wanted to shout out loud to vent the depression in his heart, but he was the dignified True Monarch Erlang Yang Zhen. If he really shouted like that, then his reputation would be ruined. Just when Yang Zhen was at his wit's end, Jiyu Shen Yuan suddenly spoke up. If you want me to compete according to True Monarch Erlang's suggestion, then it's not difficult, as long as True Monarch Erlang agrees to one condition of mine. What condition do you want? Yang Zhen immediately asked back impatiently. Simple, if I lose, then I will naturally be at True Monarch Erlang's disposal. But if I win, then True Monarch Erlang will serve my Yuzhong city for 30 years. How about it? I also don't need True Monarch Erlang to serve me tea. I just need True Monarch Erlang to move your immortal cave to a nearby mountain range. If there is any blind Yuan Ku that dares to offend my Yuzhong city, then I hope that True Monarch Erlang will first fight for my Yuzhong city. The condition that Jiyu Shen Yuan mentioned was actually a copy of True Monarch Erlang Yang Zhen's condition, but compared to True Monarch Erlang Yang Zhen's condition, the time was extended from 3 years to 30 years, and also added in the condition that he must fight for humanity. It could be said to be extremely excessive. Would this True Monarch Erlang really agree to such a condition? You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.